Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting, the Thursday, November 16th Delta Stewardship Council meeting to order, and we will begin by establishing a quorum with a roll call.
Johnston here. Weinberg here.
Tatayan here.
Fiorini here.
Thompson here.
We have a quorum. The next item is to convene to executive closed session. It is now 9 o'clock. I expect that we shall return approximately 10:15. For those of you that are following on the webcast, 10:15 I think would be a good target time to return. So we are now moving on to executive closed session. Thank you. Hey, Bob, the monitors apparently work in both directions, but not in this direction.
You didn't plan it that way, did
Did you put a quarter in it?
Well, actually, it's fine when other people are speaking, but it's distracting when I'm speaking and looking at myself. Yeah, very. Looks like it's going to work. So are we good to go? Okay, thanks, Bob. We are reconvening now in open session. I have nothing to report from our closed session. It completes file item number 4. File item number 5, the adoption of the October 26th, 2017 meeting summary. What's your pleasure? Tatayan moves, Johnston seconds. Any discussion on the motion?
Tatayan, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
Thompson?
Motion passes unanimously. File item number 6, the chair's report. The Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee met on Monday of this week, and we had a great turnout, and I'm going to call upon our Chief Deputy, Jessica Law, who served as her final installment as the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee Coordinator for this meeting, to give us a summary of the highlights of the meeting on Monday. Jessica?
Okay. Thank you, Chair Fiorini. Good morning, council members. So thank you to those of you who attended the DPIC meeting on Monday. It was our 8th meeting, and we had set out to focus the meeting discussion on 2 topics, one on ecosystem restoration to the year 2050, and then also One Delta, One Science. So these topics are something that we cover at most of the meetings, but we had a very robust discussion on the first topic, the ecosystem restoration program. And it was really a discussion to set up and to get feedback from the committee members for our own ecosystem amendment to the Delta Plan, Chapter 4. So we had a series of presentations. Ron Melser, Senior Environmental Scientist from the Stewardship Council, came and presented an overview of the amendment to the Delta Plan, similar to the presentation that he did at the council meeting last month. And then we also had an update on the Eco Restore project per our usual meeting agenda item. And Christopher Trinnell and Bill Harrell from the California Natural Resources Agency and Department of Water Resources came and presented that. And they focused less on individual projects and much more on sort of an overall vision for restoration from the ecosystem, or from the Eco Restore projects. And then we had a presentation by Erica Lovejoy and Eric Schmidt from Sustainable Conservation. If you remember, at the previous DPIC meeting, we had done a survey of the committee members and the eco-restore projects and asked them what barriers were to implementing those projects. So Sustainable Conservation came and provided an overview of some simplified permitting opportunities in the state. And committee members commented on that and also the vision for the eco-restore program. We also had a series of presentations on the conservation framework, which you have heard a few times, but that document is reaching its final stages. It's in public comment right now. And then also a presentation on the cash slough planning process and the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. So overall, very robust discussion from the committee members, a lot of encouragement to move forward with restoration, an overall vision, one that balances the agricultural activities in the Delta and really provides a basis for our work moving forward. So that was that first agenda item, and then we had a focus on the Delta Science Action Agenda, which was finalized this year, and this Delta Science Plan, which will be reviewed next year. So we asked for committee support and commitment to engaging on that through the Delta Agency Science Work Group. So those are the highlights. Any questions?
Any questions? I should point out that Vice Chair Tatiana and Councilmember Johnston were present at the meetings. Patrick?
Yeah, just an observation. I was struck as I listened to it, the value of the every 6 month meetings that you and Skip and Jessica and the rest of our staff participated, and John participated in. With so many other state and federal agencies, and two things. One, I served on the board when it was Cal-Fed. This is much better. It's much more participatory. And part of it, the credit goes to the federal agencies engaging in a real way in which perhaps Keith recalls these days too, I didn't think was always the case in the past. So I think that that's quite good. And secondly, while often it seems like there's a tendency to focus on the glass half full or half empty, it is half full at least when it comes to the plans, whether it's the flood board or whether it's Department of Fish and Wildlife or the Delta Plan and our updates. There's a convergence or an overlap of values, the co-equal goals, and of course there's lots of particulars and lots of places to argue about how to do things, but I think if you compare the collective effort with what was the state of cooperation and planning and implementation, because many of the eco-restore projects are making real progress. If you look at where we are at the end of 2017 compared to 10 years ago, collectively, there's a lot of progress, as difficult as so many of these issues are. So I think that's highlighted and encouraged, and the effort to be the border collie for all these agencies that I think the council provides is really good.
Patrick, I really appreciate your complimentary comparison. We put a lot of effort into the planning and briefing of each of the agencies that sits at that table. But quite frankly, those meetings are the hardest thing that I have to do. There's a lot of stress involved with trying to create an atmosphere where there is good dialogue and there is a focus on the accomplishments that have occurred. So I'm glad that's reflected in the outcomes of the meeting. I really appreciate your comments.
Mr. Chairman. And to Patrick's comments, I've only had 2 meetings, but it seems like everyone is engaged from the feds, the state, and our our involvement, local government. So I appreciate that involvement and their willingness to listen to all sides. I've always tried to bring the local government perspective, and it was, I think, well received. But I want to take this opportunity to, I made a request for an extension on a comment period on the conservation framework to Carl Wilcox, and he immediately said, yeah, I think we can do that. And, local government, sometimes we're a bit thin when it comes to our staff, so the additional time was appreciated from Solano, certainly, and my colleagues in the Delta. Thank you.
Roger that. Anything else on DPIC? Okay. Susan?
So what I found particularly engaging about the meeting was the high-level leaders who were so enthusiastic about the progress that has been made, and it was just really something to see the enthusiasm in the room. I thought not very many meetings with directors of agencies, and federal and state, engaging in such a positive, enthusiastic manner. So I really appreciated that.
We will have a letter going out to the committee members, hopefully tomorrow, and a meeting summary to follow sometime within a week or so, and we'll make sure that you're all copied on that as you will be interested to read what we say. So Jessica, thank you. It's been a marvelous tour of duty, and thank you for all the efforts that you've put into these DPIC meetings that have resulted in successful outcomes.
Thank you.
The additional item I wanted to touch on is our reporting on our open houses that we had. We held in Stockton on Wednesday, November 1st, and here in Sacramento on Thursday, November 2nd, to review or to present to the public the EIR that is currently out for comment regarding CSO performance measures and the levy investment strategy. I think the meeting in Stockton was oriented towards an evening meeting, started at 4, lasted till 7. We had a pretty good turnout between 4 and 5:30, but I don't think anybody came after 5:30. Skip, I'm just mentioning that for you. No, I'm just reporting. No, I'm just reporting back that we conducted an evening meeting, but the bulk of the people that attended arrived between 4 and 5. And then here in Sacramento, which is the trend continues, the meeting was held from 10 to 1, and I don't think anybody came after noon. So the attendance was slanted towards the first hour and a half of the open houses. But in both cases, staff did an amazing job. The posters were up describing the process. We had staff members at each station to explain the details to those that were interested and had questions. Comment cards were available. So it was very, very well organized, very well done, and I think the interested public was appreciative of the efforts that we made in Stockton and Sacramento. So I think anyone else who attended wish to comment? All right, that concludes my chair's report. Any requests for public comment? No? Then we are now on to file item number 7, the executive officer's report. Jessica Pearson.
Okay. Good morning. A week ago Monday, the California Department of Water Resources certified that its Decker Island restoration project, which is part of the administration's Eco Restore program, is consistent with the council's Delta Plan and its 14 regulations. That November 6th filing is posted on our website, and it opened a 30-day review period, which we announced via our listserv and also through our well-followed Twitter account. Because the period for review and the possible appeal is open, I'll just briefly describe the proposed project. It's located along the Sacramento River in Solano County, adjacent to Sherman Island, and it's currently an emergent wetland with some tidal connectivity. The project proposes to enhance up to 140 acres of tidal wetland, associated marsh and riparian habitats in order to benefit special status species such as Delta smelt and Swainson's hawk. It includes work to lower a section of levee, reconfigure internal berms, and excavate a southern breach. And together, these actions purport to increase water levels at the site and flow, increase access for fish, and inhibit the establishment of invasive vegetation. So for details regarding the review period, please visit our website. The Delta Conservation Framework document that we've been tracking, prepared by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, is up tonight as the subject of a public meeting in Walnut Grove. And as Skip mentioned, that comment period for that document has been extended and now closes on December 8th. So you may recall from previous presentations that this framework is intended to guide regional planning, permitting, and conservation grant making in the Delta, Sassoon Marsh, and Yolo bypass, and that we're looking at it closely to inform elements of our upcoming ecosystem amendment. As Randy mentioned, we held 2 public open houses earlier this month in Stockton and Sacramento to explain and answer questions about the Delta Plan Amendments Programmatic Environmental Impact Report. If there's anyone who missed those workshops, they are posted online, so the presentation can be reviewed. But furthermore, we'd like to offer our staff are available for questions or for walkthroughs if anyone has specific needs or wants to follow up further for details. The public comment period on the EIR runs until 5 p.m. on Monday, December 18th. And I'd ask you to note that our December council meeting, which is on December 14th, will also include a public hearing on the EIR. That will be a little bit of an unusual meeting for us. We're going to start around 1 o'clock with regular business, and then around 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock, we will hold the public hearing. And that's going to be at the City Hall Galleria in West Sacramento. We did send a letter this month commenting on the Delta Conservation Framework, so that a copy of that is available for you to review. And then I guess just previewing other items on the agenda, we've got a nomination to fill an upcoming vacancy on the Delta Independent Science Board. That is an action item. We'll continue our annual updates on flood season preparedness for the season ahead. And then we'll end with an update from Kamiar Gavecci of the Department of Water Resources, who will be presenting on the current efforts to develop a 2018 update to the California Water Plan and how that relates to our efforts here in managing and implementing a Delta plan. And I don't believe that we have a legal update today, is that correct? Okay, so with that, I conclude my executive officer's report unless there are questions.
Any questions of Jessica? All right, then that concludes file item number 7. Any requests for public comment? Great, okay. Then on to file item number 8, lead scientist report, Dr. John Calloway.
Thank you, Chair and council members. So there's a number of items that I wanted to review today, and I'll start with a recent paper that was in San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science on winter run Chinook salmon. And this is a paper that was based on the IEP's SAIL project. SAIL stands for Sturgeon and Salmon Assessment and Indicators by Life Stage. And this was an effort set up within IEP to really evaluate what do we know about Chinook salmon, what are we currently monitoring, and how can we improve the monitoring to address management questions. I do also want to point out the second author on the report, Sean Wendell, was a Sea Grant Fellow at the Delta Science Program in 2015 and actually participated in this through his effort with the science program. The article is, the lead author is Rachel Johnson, and it's really a collection of all the people in the Delta doing work on salmon. And as coming to the Delta as a tidal marsh ecologist, I've been challenged to learn a lot about salmon and about salmon management issues. And this paper, as well as the paper that I think Cliff summarized for you by Russell Perry that was in the State of the Bay Delta Science, really are two outstanding summaries of current knowledge about salmon. So as you know, salmon are an anadromous species, and they move in and out of the Sacramento River Valley. So the challenge in monitoring and managing them is you really have to understand what's happening with them in a number of different places throughout their life history. And so that's really what this report was trying to get at. What are we currently monitoring, and are we understanding what's happening with their life history throughout their entire life history to really get at the critical management questions? What they found was that really we don't have good enough information. We have good information in certain places or at certain parts of their life history. As they move down and they come through the Red Bluff Diversion Dam, we get a really good estimate of the population size of that at that stage of their juvenile life history. And then they move through the Delta and we sample them, but we don't really have good population numbers. Then they move out to the ocean and come back, and we get a very good estimate when they come back of what the adult population is. But what's really lacking is better information throughout their entire life history so that we can link management issues to those stages in their life history. And that's why they really are focusing on those life history issues for the species. So really the bulk of the article is 6 specific management recommendations to improve monitoring so that we can get better data for management. So I'll just briefly summarize their 6 recommendations. The first was to incorporate identification of the individual runs of salmon using genetic information rather than size information. Currently, as the fish move down, there's four different runs that move through the system. And currently they're distinguished based on their size, assuming that the bigger fish are coming down earlier. But what they found when they genetically identify the fish is that really is not a good enough identification tool, and a lot of misidentification is done. So they recommend using genetic techniques that are being developed so that you don't have to kill the fish to sample it, but you can actually just get some tissue and do some genetic analysis. And then we'll actually have a much better idea of the specific individuals within the runs. They also identify that our abundance estimates are really good at those 2 stages of their life history, but we're sampling, but we need to get better estimates of our sampling efficiency, of the sampling methods, so that we can go from sample size to population estimates. And they make some specific recommendations about how to do that. They also emphasize that we need to use more of the biotelemetry that's being used to understand fish movement and fish survivorship as they move throughout the Delta and other parts of the system. They recommend that not only do we need to understand absolute population size, but we need to understand more about the diversity of the population. So we want to maintain a healthy population that has some significant genetic diversity and behavioral diversity. And so they make some recommendations about how we could be sure that we are not just maintaining a population with low genetic diversity, but a population that has some broader genetic diversity. Their 5th recommendation is to look not just at numbers, but at fish condition. And so they identify that we need to understand about the health of the fish, any diseases that the fish might have, in addition to just numbers. And then lastly, they recommend that the data that's collected be available publicly. And so as more and more there's a real interest in making data available to everyone that's interested, and especially with a lot of these real-time data like the biotelemetry data, it can be made available almost instantaneously. So they highlight that data could be used for a wide range of management issues, as well as just for synthesis to combine data from different sources. And so they make a strong recommendation for open data or available data for public access. And they point out, those are their 6 recommendations, and they point out with those kinds of improvements, we would be able to get at some of the really challenging management questions, like how do restoration projects benefit salmon survivorship, and how do they benefit salmon growth? So I think it's a really useful sort of state of our understanding as well as recommendations for future monitoring.
We have a question on that
Questions?
matter.
Yeah, no, you were starting to get to what I was questioning is, you know, a lot of the papers I think we've been seeing over the last several months or year gets to these big technological advances in monitoring. And we're getting more real time, we're getting, you know, finer detail, but yet restoration projects are going forward. And, you know, are these advances in monitoring around the margins of restoration or making the success criteria a little more specific or refined, or is this the potential to have significant effects on how you create, how you restore, how you manage that restoration, how you define success? Because we've got the ecosystem amendment coming up, and it's just like month after month, we're seeing all this stuff about monitoring, and that says, gee, is there some, revelation that we're going to get that's inconsistent with where physically, we've been looking at restoration? Because there just seems to be an evolution going on here, but there's also pressure to restore. So is there conflict, or do we have to reconcile, or are we just on, is this adaptive management?
I think, as you said, it is adaptive management. It really is incorporating that monitoring into the activities, restoration or otherwise, that are taking place. And really, I think there's more and more awareness of the monitoring that's being done has to address the critical management questions. And so I think that to me is where the link needs to be made, so that we are collecting the appropriate data to design restoration projects. And I think one thing about adaptive management and the monitoring is it can be used in a variety of timescales. So it could be used for actively managing individual sites, but even more importantly, for improving the design of future sites down the road, so that we're making progress as we move forward.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I think the emphasis should be is, are we doing, is there information that's going to mean we've done something at the wrong site in the wrong way? And, or is it not? I mean, that's sort of the linkage, the practical application of this science. So and I'm sure you're already doing it, but just to kind of ask staff as you do the ecosystem or the ecosystem restoration amendment, or whatever we're calling it. Is that what we're calling it?
Ecosystem.
The ecosystem amendment, that we have some discussion about, what these advances in science mean for restoration projects in these different timeframes, and just how we, connect those dots and make these decisions on doing projects. Because this is a lot of good work, and we're emphasizing, we're seeing restoration projects want to make sure that somehow this is all linked.
I think there's definitely strong awareness of those issues.
I knew there was.
And definitely the ecosystem amendment will be developed in that context of really linking the science and the monitoring to the restoration and management activities.
Because even the near-term projects, we want, to make them as successful as possible.
Yeah.
And that's why,
Sometimes we learn from our failures, so we should learn from our failures.
Yes.
So, and it's okay to experiment and try different things, but we just want to make sure we're making progress.
Well, and it's certainly worth looking at it again through this lens as we do the amendment, but I would argue for in recognition of the foresight of the 2013 Delta Plan, which has a regulation which requires that these projects be based on best available science, which implies that they are utilizing these advancements as they arise and are commercially available, but also that they engage in adaptive management, which implies monitoring and all that goes along with that. Also, next year, the Independent Science Board is going to be fully immersed in a complete review of all monitoring in the Delta and identifying where improvements can be made there, and we're tracking that and working with them very closely.
So, maybe the issue I'm bringing up from a planning perspective is a question of whether there's risk in going ahead. Because, again, we're talking about, significant amounts of funds. We're in a very challenged funding environment for ecosystem restoration. So, you look at it, is there a risk that, gee, we're going to find out something? Yeah, we learned from failure, but that assessment of risk, given advancements in science, we don't want to, set something up that may fail. That's my only point. Or maybe that's.
So I should restate, what I was trying to get at was incorporating experiments, not designing entire sites, so in a risky sense, but incorporating experiments where you can try different treatments, and some of them work and some of them don't. But I think, the current state of knowledge is definitely there to design sites in an effective way. It's just fine tuning and improving.
Yeah, and maybe that's the point that, at least for as one council member looking at the ecosystem amendment, is to have, tie these things together and say, gee, it's not much of a risk. Well, there is a risk. We may find out something in the future, but that's just the nature of the beast. But there's all these pluses to what we know now. We think we know a lot now. It could change, but change where, your investment in this restoration may not pan out. I mean, I think that we just need to address that in the amendment to recognize there's some risk, but it's not great, or however you feel it is.
I think a
maybe
lot
it's
would argue the
non-issue.
greater risk is in waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can't, that's the tension. So it's making the case that, yeah, we know enough and we've seen enough success, but it can only get better, and the focus on adaptive management is taking all of this data we'll get from advances and making those restoration projects more effective and manage it more effectively.
I also think that one of the things that we're going to continue to advocate for is a greater investment in Delta science, because while we'll probably always be in a resource-constrained environment for ecosystem restoration, arguably we're not in one now. I mean, compared to previous years where we've got Prop 1, we've got millions of dollars that the contractors are on the hook for in the biological opinions to spend on these projects. There's a lot of money flowing towards projects. Can we keep pace with the science funding, I think, is a big question to make sure that we're improving the way we do these projects in the future and learning from them accordingly.
Yeah, and showing how, and again, back to the ecosystem amendment, how these investments in science and these advances add value to the existing investments and that linkage.
I think all one had to do was to attend the Delta Science Conference a year ago and leave from that knowing that there is so much data, so much science in support of introducing the water into the floodplains to improve the food web, and to just overwhelming evidence on the macro scale of what needs to be done. And the successes that were pointed out at DPIC on Monday related to the Eco-Restore projects. That's 30,000 acres over 5 years that's in the midst of being implemented. The challenge for adaptive management is to be able to monitor baselines and monitor the right things, and I think that's the point of John's report here, is that we're in a paradigm shift. And monitoring is key. And Jessica rightly pointed out that the Independent Science Board has identified this as a key issue that they want to take a look at. And we will be informed by their work as we continue to do ours. You'll have the opportunity to have dinner with them tonight. So there you go. Okay.
Okay, any other questions on CM? Okay, so the second topic is the State of the Estuary Conference that was held a month ago and that we've already told you about, but that I just want to highlight a few things, one of which really the take-home messages there was now is the time to do restoration, that in the face of climate change, if we wait to do restoration, it's going to become much, much more challenging. But overall, just a few points about that conference. As I mentioned previously, it was really great attendance, more connection between the Bay and Delta at the conference than at any conference I've seen in the past. Lots of participation from the Stewardship Council. We had 5 posters, ranging from land use and restoration to performance measures and presenting the science action agenda. The key themes that were presented there at the conference were habitats and living resources and climate resiliency. And as I said, I think really the take-home message from those groups of talks was really that the restoration that's been done to date within the Bay, and similarly probably within the Suisun and the Delta, is the relatively easy restoration where we just break down a levee and let species establish on their own. Moving forward, with climate change, with other challenging issues, restoration will become more challenging, but we have the tools and the knowledge to move forward using adaptive management. Some of the challenges, I think, are sediment availability and as well as invasive species, but there was a big focus on sediment availability and building coastal or tidal marshes in the face of sea level rise. There also were sessions on water quality and estuary stewardship. On the estuary stewardship side, there was a big focus on really engaging the public. There was a plenary talk on citizen science and engaging the public and getting the public involved in collecting scientific information, as well as just a general focus on incorporating the broad range of communities within the estuary, not just the typical community that's already engaged on conservation issues. So I think that was important. There were a number of sessions, as I mentioned previously, on the Delta. One of the sessions that Randy and I participated in, there was a good discussion of the findings from the Science Enterprise Workshop and really how we are still moving forward from that workshop a year ago. And a big part of that actually was a valuable discussion on the level of science funding and the opportunity and the need for securing more funding for science so that we can incorporate science into the management that's being done. And there's ongoing work that hopefully we will be able to continue to build support for funding of science in the Delta and the Bay. The other topic that I want to summarize relates to the panel review of the Yolo bypass efforts for evaluating fish passage within the Yolo bypass. I already mentioned the Chinook salmon that move through the Delta and that area, and there's lots of evidence that if the fish have the opportunity to move into floodplains or move into tidal wetlands, they have more opportunity for feeding and can increase their size and increase their survivorship as they move out into the ocean. And so because of that awareness, there's an effort to change the configuration of the Fremont Weir so that there's a notch, a lowering in certain areas to allow for more water to move into the Yolo bypass in certain times of the year. Not into the entire bypass, but a small area of the bypass. And so that's been proposed as part of one of the RPA efforts for the biological opinion. And the question is, how big should that notch be? Where should it be located? How should it be operated to maximize fish use? Since we can't do that and then undo it, a number of models were used to evaluate how to identify where best to do that. There's no single model that can evaluate all of those issues of access onto the floodplain, growth and survivorship and movement out into the marine areas. So a number of different models were used. And there were questions about which model might give the most beneficial data. So a panel was put together by the science program to evaluate the use of those models and their effectiveness in evaluating these alternatives. Their summary really was that the models do provide some good input. It doesn't provide enough information. There's still some uncertainty about exactly where that should be located, but the obvious take-home message is more flow into the bypass means more fish are going to move into the bypass. And what they summarized really was that integrating those models and using a mix of information from the different models will improve the design. We know enough now that we should go forward with the notch. They recommended that the notch design and implementation be done with some flexibility so that it could be opened or closed at different levels, depending on the flows. and potentially with multiple locations so that it could be, some areas could be opened at certain times and others at other times. But that we do know enough to move forward, and so that information was conveyed to the Bureau of Reclamation that they will then incorporate into their environmental documents. Any questions on that, on the Yolo bypass?
Do they ever invoke the help of fishermen to advise on how to design fish projects?
Not that I'm aware
Okay.
of.
I'm just wondering.
The fish that are moving in are teeny tiny little fish, not big salmon. Actually, there is also a consideration of the adult migration in the opposite direction, but really the major focus is on the juvenile fish. Okay, and then the last two are really more just announcements. One is that similar to that review of the Yola bypass modeling, coming up in December will be the 2017 review of the long-term operations for biological opinions, or the LOBO review that the Delta Science Program has facilitated every year for the last 6 or 7 years. And that will be coming up again here in early December. And again, the idea is to evaluate what knowledge has been learned from the operations and the management efforts for the long-term operations in the past, what uncertainties exist, what critical questions need to be addressed to improve operations into the future. And so that panel will be meeting for a 3-day meeting in early December, as well as a field trip to the Stanislaus River to look at some of the management issues there. And it's 4 of the 6 members, I think, are returning members who've reviewed in the past, with 2 additional new members who will help to answer those critical questions for the Bureau, for NIMS, and for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the other upcoming event in early December is a symposium co-sponsored with UC Davis on managed relocation. Managed relocation is the idea that species we're already seeing shifts in their distribution with changing climate conditions. Some species can easily move to different places where the temperature or the conditions may be better with changing climate. Some species may not be able to move so easily, and so managed relocation is the idea of helping them move to those new locations. And it definitely is an intensive management effort, and a lot of debate about where we should be putting our efforts into managing species. So this conference will address what the current knowledge is around managed relocation, what the opportunities are, what the science uncertainties are, what the management issues are. It'll be, as all of our symposium are, really directed for a mix of managers and scientists. And so that's coming up December 4th at UC Davis. Any questions on
of
any
John?
of those issues?
Patrick and then Skip?
So, as the Trump administration denies that there's climate change, does the U.S. Fish and Wildlife scientist community act with regard to the kind of issue you just cited on relocation of fish?
Yes, I mean, they still are working on those issues and still moving forward despite the mixed message coming from the administration.
Not being a scientist, this relocation, intentional translocation, is that physically picking them up and moving them to another location?
Yes, that's the idea, is to actually physically move species, whether it's plants, that may not be, their seeds may not disperse, to locations where temperatures are now suitable, or moisture availability is suitable for them. Or, I mean, for certain species, it's not an issue. Birds are going to move easily to their new locations, but more sedentary species are the ones that managed relocation is focused on.
I think in a lot of these cases, it's truck and haul, but in the Northwest,
Yeah.
it's not unusual to use airplanes to move fish.
Yeah.
Any other questions of John? All right,
So we will have by the numbers.
by the numbers.
Catherine.
Good morning, council members and Chair Fiorini.
Morning.
As you see, we have a slight update to some of the numbers as of this morning, which is nice. We have a nice green number for our precipitation in the Northern Sierra, which I'm very glad to see after hearing some concern last month that our precipitation values were a little lower than where we were at this time last year. So when I had generated this report, which is unfortunately what was printed out and what you guys have in your binder, the Northern Sierra Index was reporting 5.2 inches, which was only 84% of the historical average. But when I took a look again this morning, I saw that this recent storm that has been showering all of us has brought it up to 8.1 inches, which is a whopping 126%. So things are looking really good right there. We're actually supposed to be hit with another storm around Sunday or early next week, so hopefully that will also bring in some snow. I was just looking at an article that said in some areas of the Central Sierra there could be up to 34 inches of snow, so I'm hoping to be able to have some snowpack numbers in the next couple of months. Just to give you a little perspective on precipitation, now that it's starting again last year, which was our wettest year, the value was around 13 inches, so we're not too far behind that. And then back in the drought, so the 2015-2014 water year, it was down around 4. So we're at a good place for right now. And I also wanted to say something. It says Southern Sierra, and that it's a typo. It should say Central Sierra, so my apologies for that. The value has changed only slightly from 0.7 inches to 0.8. This time last year, our wettest year, the value was around 12 inches, but back in 2015, it was only around 2. So hopefully with this next storm, actually the one that we're experiencing right now is supposed to progress down south, so hopefully they'll get some more inches in the next couple days. Moving on to water temperature. Our temperatures are, could I get the next slide? Thank you. They're looking great when compared to the historical averages. They are about 1 to 1.5 degrees lower. At Clear Creek, this time last year, our temperature was around 54 degrees, and the historical average is 55, so that's nice. In Collinsville, last year, the average was around 60 degrees, which matches what we have and is 5 degrees below the historical average. And then at Clifton Court Forebay, last year it was also 61 degrees and the historical average was 67. So it's nice to see some lower water temperature numbers, which our fish enjoy. Moving along to water supply, all of our numbers are well above the 100% average to date, with the exception of the construction going on at Oroville, so that's great to see. If we go to water quality and flow, we have some slightly more interesting numbers here this month. So the flow that we have at the Freeport sensor is great, and it's above its historical average. The flow at Vernalis is slightly decreasing, and it will keep doing so for a little while, which is one of the explanations for the higher salinity level that we're seeing. However, while this is much higher than it was last month, around 300 microsiemens per centimeter higher, it's definitely well below what we had this time last year, which was in the 700s, so that's nice to see. Moving on to the Central Valley Project and State Water Project, the exports are decreasing partially because of the time of the year. There's less demand for water, but luckily that hasn't really affected the salinity values, which are still nice and green. And for the management, the controlling factor here is the fall X2. So we have lots of fish numbers for you this month. Last month, I had said that I was hoping to report on the green sturgeon index of abundance, and after talking to one of the fish biologists with NOAA and another one at U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they said that they were hoping to get some more young of the year in this coming storm, and so he thought that they probably wouldn't have a report and a finalized number till the first of the year. So I will hopefully be reporting that to you around then. But for right now, we have some of the new index numbers from the fall midwater trawl. So for Delta smelt, this is just half of the trawl, so the September-October abundance. Next will be coming the November and December, and then there will be a general index for all four. So currently the Delta smelt index is 2, which is the second lowest, higher than last year, which was 0, so it's at least increasing. And just to note, this index number is not the number of fish. It's a number It's a little confusing, but I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody who has questions about it later on. It's a calculation done by taking the number of fish that were caught and then multiplying it by a coefficient that deals with the amount of water in the area that was surveyed. So for longfin smelt, the index number is 29, which is the highest it's been since 2013. And just to give you an idea, last year's index was 3, so it's a jump up. And for striped bass, which is the age 0 striped bass, the index is 161, and it's the highest it's been since 2011. And last year, the index was also 3. So fish numbers seem to be looking good. And that is all I have for this month.
Catherine, are the indexes relative? In other words, could one look at this and conclude that there's 80 times more striped bass than Delta smelt?
So it's very dependent on the station and how the indices are calculated, because it is my understanding, and I am not our fish expert, so I could be saying something wrong, so don't hold it against me, that the index numbers are based off of the different regions, and each region has a different weighting factor. And so it seems like John is saying no.
I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure they are not relative across species.
Okay, all right. Yes, Ken?
So, and you don't have to answer today, but it would be interesting to understand, to look at like 2015 index numbers versus, 2017 with more water in the system, and how, significant that difference is, because I think intuitively we would say, gee, these low flow years should be really bad.
So I should have mentioned that to you. After we have the index numbers for November and December, they'll put out a general one for all 4, and then I will be able to report those to you and compare those to the historical average, which will be the post-pod years, as well as what we had last year.
Yeah, I think the historical average, is one metric, but I think really looking at sort of 2015 or somewhere, where we had very low flow, to really see how much stress that seemed to put, and, maybe simplistically, that's the correlation that I would think would be, the paramount, but there may be other factors.
But, so what, the fish are responding to the current flow, but also to the last year's population. So they won't, there won't be a one-to-one relationship, but they, like, as you saw, the longfin smelt are actually recovering,
Right.
but they were at such a low number.
But if you look at 2015 and 2014, you should have, we've got this multiple low flow years and populations, so it just seems like, hey, what did the drought, what's the, and I don't know, maybe there isn't, that's the question is.
If you go back to the slides, you'll see that there is a response. Delta smelt, the numbers are so low you don't see a response,
Right.
but as you see both for striped bass, on the little inset, you see how big of a pulse up there is.
Okay, so is that, well,
It's on the back of your...
Yeah.
On the back here by the numbers.
So they both the longfin smelt and the striped bass are showing some pulse of increase.
okay, well, you answered my question.
Still a blip compared to historic numbers, but definitely they are responding.
Do we know the status of Oroville, the storage? I thought that was supposed to be on its way up. Is that?
They're going to have to do everything they can to prevent it from approaching the level it did last year, so that they don't have to utilize the emergency spillway. The primary spillway is operational, and they're going to try and, again, manage to release most of the water through the home powerhouse. So it is, at some level, it's ready to go, but they're still concerned about the ability of the emergency spillway to handle it. So they're going to keep it lower than normal.
What impact would that have as far as the flow down in the delta itself? Is that going to be? How's that correlated?
Well, I'm speculating, but I would think it may result in increased early flows to manage the reservoir level, but that ultimately it will result at peak with a lower reservoir level than you would normally expect if this were to be a normal year. It'll generate a lot of electricity.
Mr. Chair, if I could follow up on Ken's question about the end of the drought and the very wet season we had last year. Help me understand, is this fish improvement, the numbers going up, is this water flow and water temperature? They go hand in hand?
Yes. I defer to John on this, but
Right.
I would think yes.
I would think both have an effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to follow up on Ken's request that we look at this more critically and try to figure out if it's flows, water temperature, which go hand in hand, obviously, because it's important to all of this work that's going on, and an issue that we've discussed at length, tunnels and diversion of water out of the delta. So thank you.
And Judge, I think I misspoke. I mentioned Home Powerhouse. That's in another project. It's the Hyatt Powerhouse that's associated with Oroville, just for the sake of accuracy. Okay. Anything else? Catherine, I'm always amazed at how much discussion your one-page, two-sided report provides. So thank you.
New glasses, because I was looking at the screen and didn't see what it was about.
the numbers, it's the presenter. Catherine?
Okay, any requests for comment on, okay, John, thank you very much. And now you are up for file item number 9. This is an action item. John has a recommendation to fill an upcoming vacancy on the Delta Independent Science Board.
Yes, so I know that the council really appreciates the contributions and the role that the Independent Science Board plays for the Stewardship Council, for the science program, and for the broader science community within the Delta. So it's really a critical role that you provide in identifying and confirming a nomination for a new member for the Independent Science Board. And so, but before we get to Thomas Holzer, I wanted to talk briefly about Brian Atwater, who is stepping down and who served on the ISB since it began in 2009 and has made really significant contributions to the ISB as well as to science here within the Delta. He worked for USGS in Menlo Park in the late 70s and early 80s and did some very influential early papers on the geology and, surprisingly, the vegetation of the Delta. So Brian has a real mix of interests and knowledge. He developed a map of Delta geology that was published in '82. His paper he did 2 papers and a really seminal book on the Bay and Delta in 1979 on the geology of the Bay, as well as the vegetation of the Bay and the historical vegetation of the Bay. And I can say, personally, I've cited his papers many, many times and used them, so they've been very influential. Cliff told me that he kept a copy of his dissertation that was on the geology of the Delta at his desk that he used regularly as a reference for that geology of the Delta. Brian also is probably, I think, the only ISB member who's actually lived in the Delta. He lived in Jersey Island when he was doing all of his work in the late 70s and early 80s. Beyond the work that he's done in the Delta, he actually is most famous for the work that he's done on earthquakes and tsunamis, and he did some really high-profile work identifying a historic earthquake that occurred in the Pacific Northwest in 1700. So there's no historical record of the earthquake, but by looking back at the geological record and looking at trees that all died in the same year in 1700, he was able to identify that an earthquake that was identified to be between 8.7 and 9.2 on the Richter scale occurred in 1700, causing a huge tsunami in Japan. When a researcher in Japan was able to connect the historic record in Japan of the tsunami to Brian's work, it actually received very, very high-level recognition. Brian, I can say for sure, is the only member of the ISB who was one of Time Magazine's 100 Influential People of the Year, and he received that award in 2005. He also, his work was covered, that same work was covered in the New Yorker, and he's a fellow of the Benjamin Franklin Institute, which if you look at the fellows of that institute, it's some of the most high-profile scientists in the world, really. So he's received enormous recognition, as he should. In terms of his contributions here to the ISB, his biggest immediate contribution, a recent contribution, was leading the workshop review on hazards associated with earthquakes and levees in the Delta, and that was a review that the ISB did last year. The workshop was held the year before, and talking to other ISB members and other staff, one thing that they said that Brian really had a lot of insight into, given that he was one of the few, he's really the only geologist on the ISB, he had the idea to have a workshop, bring together many other people to give input to the ISB so that they could put together their report. In addition to that, all of the staff and other ISB members I talked to really said Brian really has outstanding communication skills. He really pushed the ISB, rather than having long, detailed reports, to have focused, concise reports, really get the key information out there up front and in a really effective way. So he's really thoughtful in that way, and really thoughtful as well in the discussion. So everyone who I spoke to said how helpful and kind and thoughtful Brian was really in working with. And I think part of the reason the ISB is so successful is it's such a good working group of people, and Brian really was a big part of that. So he really embodies the spirit of the ISB to be insightful and critical and knowledgeable, but really constructive and helpful. So I think Brian deserves a lot of thanks for his long-term commitment. Okay, so with that, then I'll mention,
John, I was just thinking, for the recommended scientist to step into this, the introduction that you just gave describing Brian is pretty intimidating.
Yeah, he is, Brian, but Brian is the least intimidating person you could work with. Truly an unbelievable record, but really humble, incredibly humble and thoughtful. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he does have, it's a challenge to fill his shoes or his efforts. With that said, Tom Holzer is really, who has been identified as a replacement for this vacancy, is really as well a really outstanding scientist, and I think will make great contributions to the ISB. In terms of looking for someone to replace Brian, Cliff Dahm really started the search for this, and he asked the ISB members as well as others of what area of interest we really needed on the ISB to complement the current members. So the expertise that was identified was in the area of earthquake hazards, flood hazards, geology, and risk assessment. This position was advertised at the Stewardship Council's website. Cliff sought input from the ISB members as well as many other members, and solicited applications from a number of potential applicants. And then after Cliff finished his term, then I took over, and we completed the search with in-person interviews, as well as references that were collected for the potential members. And as I mentioned, Tom Holzer was identified as the top candidate. His area of specialty really matches the ISB's needs. His expertise is in earthquake-induced liquefaction, so the shaking of the ground that causes the ground to lose its structure and stability, that would have significant effects on levee or other infrastructure within the Delta. He's done that in a variety of places in the Bay Area as well as many other places around the world. He's looked at a variety of ways of evaluating earthquake hazards and risks at land subsidence caused by groundwater withdrawal and other issues. Professionally, he served at the USGS from 1975 to 2016 so he recently retired. He's now an emeritus scientist at USGS, and he also was a consulting professor at Stanford from 94 to 2016. He has over 100 peer-reviewed publications, including editing 3 books. He's written a book for the general audience, so as with Brian, he's really aware of not just communicating to your peers, but communicating to a broader audience. The book that he wrote is called Living with Unstable Ground. It's a paperback for non-geology students and for others that are interested in earthquake science. He currently also is actually interested in working on a general audience book on climate change as well. So I think he does have that broad interest in a mix of issues. He has worked on an interesting report on global earthquake fatalities and the link between earthquake intensity and fatalities. And in addition to all of his research, he served on a number of advisory panels. He served on multiple panels for the National Science Foundation as well as the National Academy of Sciences, two of the most prestigious and widely respected scientific organizations in the country. He served on panels for the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute and the Geological Society of America. And for the National Academy, he actually was the chair of their panel on land subsidence. So he's really done similar kinds of work in terms of providing that sort of advisory role. He was recognized for his service for that kinds of advisory work with a Distinguished Service Award, not just from USGS, but actually from the Department of Interior. So across the entire Department of Interior in 2012, he was recognized. And his references, just like Brian's, also highlight his collegial and helpful, insightful collaboration. I'll just quote one of the letters of recommendation. They said, Dr. Holzer commands great respect across a broad reach of the engineering sciences, both for his scientific and technical expertise, as well as his abilities to work with multiple individuals and groups, reflecting a wide range of interests. In his interview, he impressed myself and the other Delta Science Program staff that interviewed him in terms of his really thoughtful comments on engaging colleagues, working to reach consensus, and an awareness of broader science issues and the importance of social science and risk issues and other concerns. So based on his research experience, his previous role in advisory committees, and his outstanding references and interviews, I strongly recommend Tom Holzer as a new member of the Independent Science Board.
Great, John. You've heard the recommendation. I call your attention to file item number 9, which makes up a significant part of our board packet that includes his CV and publications, a very, very impressive record. The recommendation is to appoint Dr. Thomas Holzer, an emeritus scientist at the United States Geological Survey, for a position on the Delta Independent Science Board. We have a motion, Damrell, second, Weinberg. Any discussion on the matter? We're ready for the vote.
Johnston, aye.
Damrell, aye.
Weinberg, aye.
Tatayan, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
Thompson, aye.
Motion passes unanimously. John, thank you for that.
Great, thank you, and I'm sure that both Brian and Tom Holzer will be very excited to hear the news.
Great. Yeah, both, indeed. There were no, I should point out, there were no requests for public comment on file item number 9. So the next item is scheduled for 12:30, so we're going to break for lunch now and resume here promptly at 12:30. See you then.
don't want to go there. I want the kids, though.
Yeah, of course.
But he only needs it for 1 day. So we'll take it.
Turn on your mic.
That's the deal. We're taking it.
There you go.
So, yeah, that's.
You got a little leverage.
Exactly.
That's good.
Thank you, Bob. Welcome back. We are reconvening after our lunch break. Before I introduce the next agenda item, I wanted to hearken back to part of Jessica Pearson's report. She indicated that on Thursday, December 14th, we will be holding a hearing on our programmatic EIR from 4 to 7 here in Sacramento. But in addition to that, there is also the opportunity to submit written comments. We encourage written comments. Those are very valuable to us. There are forms on the table outside entitled Delta Plan Amendments Draft Program Environmental Impact Report Comment Card. So anyone interested in providing comments can also submit in writing. And the forms are outside on the table. So with that housekeeping item, we're on to file item number 10, the 2018 flood season preparedness. Jessica.
Okay, thanks. And before I toss it over to Aaron, I just wanted to kind of provide some context as to why we have this on the agenda today. We treat this as an annual item, and that's in large part due to the charge that was given to us by the legislature that the Delta Plan shall attempt to reduce risks to people, property, and state interests in the Delta by promoting effective emergency preparedness, appropriate land uses, and strategic levee investments. And in fact, the legislature thought this role was so important that it's essentially stated twice in the Reform Act. It also shows up under the inherent objectives and the co-equal goals. So as we are finishing up work on our Delta levee investment strategy recommendations, and that's currently under environmental review, and revising some of our own recommendations on all aspects of flood management, it's a great time to hear from those who are close to the on-the-ground activity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin Mullen.
Thank you, Jessica. I think she stole my notes because that was basically, she summarized basically what I was going to say at the beginning of this. To facilitate our discussion today, we thought it would be good to have a variety of perspectives. So we have 3 people here today from different aspects of the emergency response system. We have Steve Mello at the end, who is the president of Reclamation District 563, Tyler Island. Mr. Mello will be discussing last year's high water event, including the challenges related to flood fighting. Next to him, we have Casey Richmond, Regional Flood Preparedness Section Chief from DWR. Ms. Richmond will be providing an update on DWR's Delta Emergency Response Grants, as well as its efforts to stockpile emergency response equipment and supplies in strategic in-Delta locations. And we have Lynn Olson, Senior Emergency, excuse me? Oh, okay. Lynn Olson, Senior Emergency Services Coordinator from the California Office of Emergency Services. Ms. Olson will provide an update on the development of the Northern California Catastrophic Flood Response Plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve.
Hi, my name is Steve Mello, as you just heard. Chairman Fiorini and council members, thank you for inviting me here today to tell you about the levee emergencies we experienced on Tyler Island RD 563 in 2017. I live and farm on Tyler Island, and I am president of the board of trustees that run this local maintaining agency. The response to this emergency started on January 6th, and my last documented patrol was May 2nd. So this was a very long-lasting emergency. RD 563 has had geotechnical work done to ascertain the cause or causes of the near total levee failure of our North Fork Mokelumne River levee. We are awaiting engineering analysis of this geotech work to determine what needs to be done to further stabilize this area and at what cost. On January 6th, using common sense and information from the California Data Exchange Center, or CDEC, we knew that we would be experiencing high water. A regular Board of Trustees meeting was scheduled for January 10th. Prior to that, I arranged for 18 people to meet at my office after the meeting to be trained on patrol activities and provide the things that they would need to do their jobs. CDEC shows actual water surface elevations or stage at 3 upstream gauges that we monitor regularly during high water events. I have data from the past high water events in 83, 86, and 97, as well as 2006 that is the trustees and our engineers, Kelton, Sinek, and Nudek. Chris Nudek is our principal engineer. Can study to anticipate what is going to happen flood threat-wise. These CDEC stations are Michigan Bar at the Sacramento County line, McConnell at Highway 99, and both of those are on the Cosumnes River, and Benson's Ferry, which is just upstream from us on the McColney River and Franklin Road. The 1-6, 10 a.m. plots indicated that we are not currently in need of patrolling. Water levels would be high, but below the district's threshold to commence formal 24-hour patrols. I took a trustee, John Marias, and my son out on informal patrols to begin their training. They'd not been through anything like this before. At 8 a.m., January 10th, CDEC showed actual stage at Benson's Ferries to be below the district's threshold to start formal patrols. That threshold is 16 feet, and we know how that relates to our levees, tops of our levee. At Benson's Ferry, it was expected to be met at 8 a.m. January 12th, so it was going to barely be over 16, according to their 10th projections. At the district's regular meeting, it was determined I would consult with our principal engineer, Chris Nudek of KSN, and make the calls to when we went on and off formal patrols during these issues. A legal consultant, Scott Shapiro of Danny Brand, went over with the trustees the legal procedures to be followed when dealing with emergencies. I'd been through it before, but the other trustees hadn't. At my discretion, formal double patrols commenced at 8 a.m. January 11th and continued on and off through late February. Informal patrols continue still, as always. I mean, we're checking the levees in the middle of the summer. My last formal patrol, as I alluded to, was May 2nd. Excuse me, I'm battling a little cold. At 8 a.m. January 11th, CDEC estimated Benson's Ferries would peak at 18 feet stage the next morning at 8 a.m. January 12th. I felt the stage would be higher based upon actual stage reach further upstream at Michigan Bar. And again, in looking at our older records, didn't make sense. If Michigan Bar is here, it should be higher than what they're saying. And I projected 19.6 feet at Benson's Ferry at 8 a.m. Well, at 8 a.m. on 112, the CDEC plot showed that Benson's Ferry had already reached 19.98. So they blew it by 2 feet. That's very problematic. I declared a state of emergency immediately. And you can go out and look at water levels, but until you get the plots, you don't really know, and they don't come out till 8. That's why we delayed till 8. So I declared a state of emergency for Tyler Island. A stage of 20 foot at Benson's Ferry has historically caused high potential of failure of the east levee of the McCormick-Williamson tract and a surge of water coming downstream from the Franklin Pond, nearing or exceeding channel capacities downstream, which is what happened to us in 86. A marina broke loose, floated into a bridge, created a hydraulic barrier, our levees overtopped. Through our engineer, RD 563 commenced with mobilizing and installing what they call muscle wall on Tyler Slough, about 3,000 feet of our north levee, that is severely impacted by downstream surges through the McCormick-Williamson tract. The presidents of 6 local districts agreed that an emergency relief cut was needed to more safely let floodwater out of McCormick-Williamson in the event it flooded. Previous studies through the Delta Improvement Group that Gil Cosio and many others, other engineers, other trustees, other people in the know in the area, had provided the relief cut location. Never been codified, but we knew what to do. In order to get equipment to the site of the relief cut, a heavy lift Chinook helicopter was necessary. Well, this is all the same day that all hell broke loose at Oroville. Had a heck of a time getting one. But Bill Darcy of KSN arranged to rent one. The district signed legal agreements to allow this relief cut to be carried out if, in fact, McCormick-Williamson failed. It did fail, and the plan worked. We let that water out in a much safer manner than had it just found its own place to break out. And I'll talk about that later. On January 17th, in anticipation of high winds coming, we arranged for side dump rock trucks and rock in the event it was needed on January, period. On January 18th, high winds did occur and caused waterside rock slips. So on January 19th, 20th, and 21st, we stationed sites and applied rock where necessary to deal with the levee erosion. Despite 30 to 40 mile per hour winds still howling on January 22nd, all the rock was holding. And keep in mind that our nearly 11-mile section of the North Fork Nacolni River has been totally rock and been augmented several times. We have a very good rock job all the way to the top of the levee. The cost of this rock was $141,000. On January 21st, and backing up a little bit, about 3:45 p.m., a landside slip occurred on the North Fork Nacolni River. I notified Chris Nudek. We monitored the site overnight. Couldn't get anything there anyway, and it seemed stable. When I was there, it was, I was concerned, but not overly concerned. I mean, you're always concerned when you have levee slip, but it wasn't like I was crying wolf. While he arranged to get a crane barge, rock barge, and tug to get release from Van Sickle Island, where it was working, Murray Burns and Keeneland, their engineer, and Van Sickle allowed us to get the equipment. That was key. The slip did not worsen while awaiting arrival of the equipment, which commenced work early after midnight on January 24th. We bookended the site. Basically, if you have the slip occurring here, you can put rock on both sides. You start at the toe ditch, which was about 50 feet from the toe of the levee, and squeezed it in. Squeezed it levee-ward, and we were 40% done by the next morning. We did have to wait for rock. It takes a while to get rock barges up when you're pushing against current at times, but we finished the work in the morning of the 26th. That cost was $333,000. A special meeting of RD 563 was held to authorize borrowing money to pay our vendors. The district had started the year with nearly $500,000 in our account, and it costs $250,000 to $300,000 per year to pay for the other things we do. We don't just do flood control, and those other things include electricity to drain the island, maintain ditches and pumps, consulting and administrative costs, and that varies from year to year, but it's $250 to $300, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. The rest of that money is normally spent, of those original assessments, are normally spent on enhancing rock revetment, which we did extensively in 16 on Georgiana Slough. And thank goodness, because the costs would have escalated enormously had we not done that. So we enhance the rock revetment. We do vegetation, erosion control, and levee upgrade projects. RD 563 raises about $525,000 per year in assessments of the people that own ground within the district. It was arranged with the Bank of Rio Vista to write warrants as needed up to $750,000. Excuse me. Things did calm down until the second surge hit us in February. On February 11th, in our normal patrols, as a matter of fact, I found it, a clear path hole through the levee was found at about 9:30 p.m. We placed a coffer dam in place and monitored it. And if it's a boil, you don't want to stop it. But if it's a clear path, you don't want to let it run because it's going to possibly erode the levee out. It was high in the levee and stopped as stage dropped. And we have, over the years, in past years, I should say, excuse me, installed staff gauges in the North Fork channel so that we know exactly where it is. I used to measure off of siphon caps, et cetera, and it was good for comparison, but for the future generations, it's better if you had numbers for them. So we actually went to the expense to get these staff gauges in. As it was high on the levee and stopped as stage dropped, we used those staff gauges to determine how deep it was. And on February 12th, the engineer arranged for a core trench at this site, so now we know how deep we have to go to intercept it. In 2017, we core trenched 3 sites at a cost of about $15,000. In my tenure at the district since 1988, we'd only done 2 other core trenches, to give you an idea. About 9 a.m. on February 14th, RD 563 experienced a major slip about 900 feet upstream of the first slip, again on the North Fork of the Colony River. I was literally there when it happened. I was at the core trenching project right downstream, had one of my patrollers call me and said, hey, you need to get up here. I did. I got there, and this problem escalated from a little crack about 6 feet from the toe of the levee to the levee totally collapsing in about 10 minutes. And we ended up with about 4 foot of the levee crown. The levee crown is 22 foot wide. This thing was 4 foot. The only thing that was holding it was a 4-foot section in our rock, and there was water pouring through. It was very, very troubling. I called for a mandatory evacuation of the island. Our odds of holding the levee were very low. There was only about 4 feet left, and our back slope had dropped straight down, only 4 feet left of the crown of our 22-foot levee crown, and our back slope had dropped straight down and was near field level, which is below sea level, on the back slope. And it had also counter-rotated in about 75 feet from the landside toe of the levee. Our engineer arranged with DCC Engineering, Staten Island, which is RD 38, the Nature Conservancy, and Brandon Andrus Reclamation District to release a tug, crane barge, and rock barge that had been staged nearby, about 2.5 miles away. If it wasn't there, we'd have been toast. I don't think we'd have made it. Because of the close proximity of the equipment, it was soon on site. The only bulldozer available quickly was mine. We got it shipped down there, and it was mobilized with my son Gary as the operator at 11 o'clock. That's a pretty quick response. It was very disconcerting to have my son below this slip site, because if it failed, he would likely have a real hard time surviving. I told him I wanted to get a life jacket on. And we Mellows handle things with humor. He said, Dad, remember the water wings I wore up at Uncle Alan's pool? Why don't you just give me a big set of water wings, And so it was funny, but it was very tense. The contractor's dozers got on site about 5:30, and had my dozer not been there working, I don't think we would have gotten the weight behind the slip. But at any rate, the contractor's dozers got on site about 5:30, and we were able to get weight behind the slip site before the highest tide of the day that was going to occur that night. After putting 9,600 tons of rock behind the slip to stabilize it, 6,000 ton of earth and fill was placed rebuilding the levee section. A road base was then placed to replace the road, so we had a patrol road and you can get emergency equipment around. And on February 17th, the repair was complete. Cost, $985,000. The total cost of RD 563 to deal with these emergencies had grown to $1.685 million. The total cost of the geotech work and analysis is $149K. So the total cost of my RD has been so far $1,834,000. On March 6th, in order to pay our vendors, another $1.3 million line of credit was arranged with the Bank of Rio Vista, and we write warrants as necessary, for a total line of $2,050,000. Keep in mind, the Bank of Rio Vista is not that big of a bank, and we were not the only reclamation district with our hands out. To date, we have used $1.75 million of this line. In addition to dealing with flood stuff, we've had to replace a pump, fix another, and replace a portion of discharge pipe that was leaking up in the levee, in addition to our normal activities. We experienced 2 months of very high electrical bills, $50K a month. Just in 2 months, per month, $50K, $100,000. So 2017 was very trying for us, both fiscally and emotionally. The district's ability to borrow more money, and if 2018 proves to be a high water year, is not assured, as reimbursement requests take time and are subject to challenge. On 3/16, I was a panelist with DWR Subventions Program Chief Dave Mroz, Chris Nudek, and another man who I can't recall his name. It was announced that RD 563 would receive two $50,000 emergency response grants, one each for the January and February slips. That was 8 months ago today. We still haven't received a cent. The Bank of Rio Vista would kind of like to get paid back a little something, you know? The distribution of emergency grant funds should occur in a more timely manner. I think that's obvious. That's the chain of events, and I have a couple other pages here for you. I'm sorry, but I need to get this out. We Delta reclamation districts depend on CDEC projections to help us anticipate future stages in our river channels. We realize we are situated in a very dynamic area, but expect more accurate projections. Usually using actual stages reached at Michigan Bar and McConnell upstream of us, we were better able to predict stage downstream 18 to 24 hours later than DWR was. And I find that baffling. I previously mentioned CDEC, actually I had to rewrite this to get it shorter. CDEC was off 2 feet, only 24 hours out. On 1/11, they were saying it was going to be 18 feet at Benson's Ferry. Maybe I did mention it. And on the 12th, it was 19.98. On the February surge, actual stage and volume at Michigan Bar was about 50% more than the January event, yet CDEC projected lower stages downstream. How's that work? They were wrong. On a different note, DWR should consider, or the state should consider, paying to stage rock barges, crane barges, and tugs. There's no use having a rock barge if you don't have a crane barge to throw the rock. No use having either if you don't have a tug to push it around. And they should be staging this equipment at key locations at the beginning of projected high stage surges. The standby charge is prohibitively expensive for local reclamation districts with our limited budgets. There are fiscal constraints. That cost would exceed the total budget of most districts. Had our fellow districts not released the equipment they had to RD 563 when they did, to deal with these slips, Tyler Island would have likely flooded, resulting in 800 acres of habitat, wetland habitat specifically, 7,700 acres of farmland, much of the farm support industry of the North Delta. The eastern portion of Walnut Grove could very possibly have flooded, and local utilities and infrastructure would have been inundated. Also, don't forget that these Delta levees provide a corridor to the pumps at the Clifton Court 4 Bay in lieu of an isolated facility. A majority of the water that is exported south of the pumps runs on either side of my island through the North Fork Nakomi River and Georgiana Slough. Another thing, and I mentioned this, I was on the 97 feet team, flood emergency action team. We had an event in 97. We did very well. I was on the Delta Protection, Senator Patrick Johnston's Delta Protection Commission, and as such, I was invited to be part of this feat team. And one of the things I mentioned them is that we need to determine proper flood control storage space and reservoirs by incorporating actual snow water content amounts instead of the historic data to anticipate inflows and decide when to ramp up outflows. Those storage reserve capacities that they make are based upon historical data rather than real-time moisture content in the snow. And if you know there's going to be enough, and I know water's important to save, but if you know there's going to be enough water coming down from the snowpacks, why don't you let a little bit of that, create a little more flood space by letting a little of that water out earlier. To give you an idea of what the standby costs, which have been negotiated for 2018, $1,890,110 for 60 days of standby charge for a crane barge, 2 rock barges, and a tug to push them around. And that breaks down at 18-inch quarry stone, 4,000 ton of barge, and keep in mind, you got to use it. Once they load it, you're going to get it off. At 41.25 a ton, $41.25 a ton, that's $165K. Another barge loaded with 6-inch quarry stone, because you need different materials and different events, 4,000 ton at $37.50 a ton, that's $150K. Mobilization, demobilization of the equipment's $27,000 plus. Standby tug is $9,750 a day. Standby crane barge is $10,825 per day. And those figures, I was giving you figures. The standby tug's $585K for 60 days. The standby crane barge is $649,000 for 60 days. This tug's got to stay there running, and they don't shut them down. And they have to service this equipment. 168 hours of service at $718 an hour is $120,000 for that period. And the crane barges also need to be serviced at a cost of $11,045 per hour, 168 hours. That's $192,000. So that's how that 1.89 million figure got arrived at. And I thank you for bearing with me. I did go over my time.
We appreciate the firsthand account of the great work that you all did. Just one question. How many acres are assessed by the RD on Tyler Island?
About 8,500 at $55 an acre.
Okay.
And we raised $525K. That figure doesn't add up because if you do the math, 8,500 doesn't come up with that much money. But we also assess gas wells, gas pipelines, utility, infrastructure, power poles, PG&E, et cetera. There's a kicker on each property that has a house on it. The business district upon which is situated the chemical company pays a much higher fee. Surprisingly, the only one of the other beneficiaries on the district that don't pay their assessments is Sacramento County. And, it's only $11,000 a year. And that's what I've been told. It's only $11,000 a year. Well, it makes a difference because that is the cream at the top of our budget. And, with the previous, I don't know what the ongoing cost share is going to be with the subventions. But previously, we were able to leverage our money 1 to 3. We'd spend 25% and get the state to pay 75%. So that 11,000 turned into 44K if we had it. But Sac County does not pay. And that's very troubling to me because those roads benefit not only the residents of the district, but the surrounding communities.
So if I did my math right, the line of credit that you had to secure represents just a little over $200 an acre for the assessed acreage.
Correct.
Okay, great. Let's move through, and then if we have any questions for the panel. Does anyone have a question of Steve right now? Okay.
Question. Who owned the rock that you ended up getting access to that was 2.5 miles away?
The districts that I mentioned that released it.
Okay. So those regional, it was there and intentionally provided by the
It was there and they allowed
levy
us-
maintaining agencies in the region.
The other local maintaining agencies agreed to release not only their equipment, but the materials. And they were replaced in kind afterwards. And so we paid for everything that we used, the time and all that. And think of it, had there been another problem somewhere else, there's not enough equipment there to get all the stuff done. It's troubling.
Let's proceed through the panel. Casey?
Hi,
Welcome.
yes. Thank you, council members, for allowing me to come today and speak about the emergency preparedness work that we've done this year. I represent the department's Delta Flood Emergency Preparedness Response and Recovery Program. But before I get into the specifics of that program, I kind of wanted to do a recap of the past year for our flood operations at the department and give you some notable numbers. Specifically, 151 was the number of days that our Flood Operations Center was activated. 105, that was the total number of flood emergency incidents that were actively tracked by our Flood Operations Center statewide. And 250 is the number of DWR staff that were activated in some fashion to support the Flood Operations Center this year. And $92 million is the DWR investment so far in flood response and rehabilitation this year. We saw precipitation numbers throughout the state that are record-setting, with 49 atmospheric rivers making landfall over the West Coast. So if you heard the activation time for the Flood Operations Center, the staff that work in our office were activated to support emergencies for about half the year. So it's really amazing the preparedness work that we were able to accomplish in addition to that. And I know that it was probably similar for our other state partners and local agencies as well. So first I wanted to, talk about some of the efforts that our program has to support local preparedness, in specific our Delta Emergency Response Grant Program. Grants are awarded to flood emergency first responders, including counties, cities, local maintenance districts, and fire departments. The type of work that's funded includes the creation of local flood safety plans, other flood emergency planning, mapping efforts, and also the training and exercising of employees and public, and also facility improvements and the purchase of flood fight material stockpiles. The grants are also structured in such a way that the county acts as the lead agency in contracting with the state, and then that county works directly with the cities and local maintenance districts to administer the grant funds to all parties. And this structure, it mimics the state's emergency management system structure on how to access resources during an emergency. And so it really fosters that communication and the relationship building between the agencies, and that really results in a more rapid and aligned response during emergencies. This past year, we processed a second round of this grant program and awarded $4.2 million to 10 grantees within the Delta region. The major focus of the work is on procuring local emergency flood fight material stockpiles and also providing training and exercises to the plans and maps that were created over the past 3 years with funds from our first round of grants. For example, San Joaquin County on this grant is being funded to purchase 1 container of flood fight materials for each district in their county. These containers will each contain enough material for 1 mile's worth of wave wash protection, and they will be pre-positioned out on each district. Next, I want to talk to you about the materials pre-positioning that the department has done. And specifically, this graph that I have in front of you shows how our material stockpiles have grown over the past 10 years. Specifically, draw your attention to the fact that our sandbag stores have gone from 1 million to just under 4 million. We've gone from 24 miles of plastic sheeting to 164 miles. And we've also added new materials to our stockpiles, including muscle wall and super sacks.
Yes, Ken.
Want to go back to Mr. Mello's presentation, and when you look at that list, all things aren't created equal in terms of responding. So if you're kind of in that real world response, and I'll ask Mr. Mello also, is is this the right distribution of what they've got, or maybe there's things that aren't as helpful if you're responding. So just, me having no feel for, is this, are we light anywhere? Are we, maybe there's stuff that isn't really as helpful as other stuff? I mean, that's kind of my practical question as we look at, stockpiling as a strategy. And, you know, Casey, you as well.
You can go first if you want.
Well, yeah, we calculate out our materials needs based on basically for each district, we have a recommendations for the amount of each type of material that they should have, and we provide those to the districts. And specifically, what we do is we have these containers that we pre-pack with materials, and like I said, we call them kind of a flood fight first aid kit or flood fight in a box, and we're able to really quickly deploy those. They're roll-on, roll-off for trucks, and we can quickly load them up on a truck and send them out to where they need to go. And we've also pre-positioned those containers around. So, I mean, not only are we have these grants so that locals can purchase their own stockpiles, but we can supplement those with ours. As far as the distribution of materials, we've really tried to balance the amount of each type so that it kind of equals out when you're out there in the field doing, say, wave wash protection or rain coating, that, you know, we don't have way more of one type of material than another.
In the case of our district, we have historically stockpiled ourselves because there is a lag time. There were some of these containers that came out. We were very appreciative of them, but they came out after the fact. For whatever reason, the hair was standing up in the back of my neck in late 16, and so we doubled our normal stock of sandbags. We ordered sand in and distributed it throughout our levee system. We pre-made sandbags. We had visqueen staged. We had 2x4 staged and everything that you would need to deal with a wave wash situation. Our North Fork McColney River is rocked right to the top, and that has not historically been a problem. Where that really came into play is 1986, when the island flooded and the levee started eating away from the inside out. And in 86, yes, there were great volumes of those materials used to help stabilize the levee and reduce the reclamation cost after the fact. And at points, in certain locations on our levee, the levee washed almost halfway through from the inside out. And had we not arrested that erosion, if you can imagine a fetch of water 8 miles long with a 40 or 50 mile an hour wind blowing against it, you get waves out there 5 feet tall. And I mean, I saw waves breaking over the top of the levee, over the top of our visqueen. I mean, it was crazy. But had that levee washed away from the inside out, had those efforts to stabilize it not been successful, our neighbor Staten Island would have had 5-foot waves hitting their levee. And when I've told you earlier that we're all interdependent, you never realize that more than when you're out there at a flooded island when there's a heavy wind blowing and a long uninterrupted stretch of water for those waves to build power.
Ken, in 2011, Phil Eisenberg and I served as a committee and interviewed numerous people related to one of our directives to develop early implementation actions or early actions. And one of our findings was that not every island, every reclamation district was as well prepared as an island like Tyler Island. And ultimately, included in our Delta plan was a recommendation that local levee maintaining agencies should consider developing their own emergency action plans and stockpiling rock and flood fighting materials, because some were, in our view, were too dependent upon somebody else doing that for them. So it's an example of an island that was well prepared.
May I?
Sure.
The one thing that I'd like to make perfectly clear here, that stockpiles of riprap and 6-inch minus, wherever they're located in the Delta, if they need to be delivered by truck, that is very problematic when you have high stage and you have all that weight rolling on the levees. You're going to degrade the levee section. It is imperative that large quantities of earthen fill or riprap or 6-inch quarry stone be delivered by barge. And, you know, we did run rock trucks out there, but that was early in the event before stage was high. We have, in the 97 event, had the need to run rock trucks, but didn't for fear of what it would do to our district levies. And so then we went to the alternate of visqueen sandbags, et cetera.
And I think that's why our recommendation was that each reclamation district or maintaining agency develop their own emergency action plans to deal with things just like that.
Which we do have.
You do?
And by the way, we have, our district through our engineer has applied for a grant to get one of those containers. It's not been forthcoming yet. I don't know what the disposition of that application is.
Okay. Casey, please proceed.
Sure. Well, I have another slide which basically shows the pre-positioned material staging locations within the Delta region. And I have listed here the 8 locations within the Delta that the state has stockpiles. We actually have 38 locations statewide with stockpiled materials. And since 1997, we've been utilizing CDEC and also our Flood Emergency Response Information Exchange to log historic inundation areas and levee vulnerabilities to be able to strategically pre-position materials as best we can. So 2 of our largest stockpile locations are within the Delta. One of those is in Stockton. And actually, it's part of what we call our facilities improvement project in the Delta, which is actually in response to one of the SB 27 task force recommendations. But what we're doing there, we currently have the site under construction, and one of the great benefits that's going to come out of this site is that we're going to have emergency flood fight material waterside transfer. And so what was just mentioned about delivering materials by truck, rings true, and we are going to have by February 2018, a site that'll be ready for 24-hour operation at the flip of a switch. It has 2 barge slips along the property and will also be equipped with 2 large conveyors that can move material onto barges, and that's going to really give a new beneficial dynamic to the state's capabilities as far as emergency response in the Delta.
I'd like to note that, excuse me, sorry, that 563 is on this list. Those containers, when they did come in during the 17 event, were stationed at the Delta Cross Channel because we thought it would be more accessible, to the surrounding districts because they were meant for the area. They were broken into. And so we have since arranged for them to be moved to Upper Andros Island, which is higher in the system and less subject to surge from the Cosumnes River, which is one of the last untamed rivers in the United States, in California, where our biggest danger comes from. So those 2 that our name is listed as are really for the North Delta as a whole. And we found a more secure site with cameras, et cetera, to keep them from getting broken into. Thank you.
Casey, at the Delta, at the Stockton facility, that's at the east end of the Port of Stockton, correct? Is that?
So we did have some large rock stockpiled in the Port of Stockton.
At the west end of the port.
And we, so we moved that, and this new facility is on West Weber Avenue.
Right.
And the water access is along the Stockton Deepwater Ship Channel.
Right. And so did you was that Port of Stockton property, or you're just doing in conjunction with them?
The department purchased the property.
Yeah.
So it's department, state-owned property.
Right. So part of what you're describing, its accessibility is possible because the Port of Stockton dredging in the Deepwater Channel allows for those barge operations, which is more difficult in the interior of the Delta, right?
Yes, so we did actually have I think a while back, I can't remember the year, but there was a accessibility study as far as what areas within the Delta barges could access, as far as, how shallow the sloughs are and whatnot. So we did do a study of what types of barges we would need to use, size and whatnot, to access certain areas. So we did look into that. Before I finish up here, I just wanted to mention some of the other state-level work that we've done for emergency preparedness. We do have a Delta emergency response tool. This is basically an application that allows us to enter in levee damage and other real-time information, and it provides us information back out, such as time to repair the damage, material needs to do the repairs, cost estimates, and also some water quality information. And this can be very helpful with decision support when determining resource priorities for large-scale emergencies. And this year, the tool underwent some additional work to kind of broaden the tool's capabilities. And also, we've done some exercises and training for the tool and planned some additional exercises as well for that. And then I also wanted to mention our great interagency coordination and alignment work. We continue monthly meetings with Cal OES, Metropolitan Water District, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We do quarterly meetings with our Delta Working Group, which is a group that was birthed from the SB 27 task force, which includes county emergency managers, local reclamation district and district engineers, and other state and federal agency representatives. We also meet with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Emergency Response Team quarterly. And then we do a lot of public outreach, including our pre-season flood preparedness meetings. DWR hosts several meetings and attends meetings led by others. And then we also have a lot of communication work with locals to document levee vulnerabilities, and this year specifically to produce contingency plans for vulnerable areas. And then we continue messaging that reinforces the SIMS structure and encourage locals to train in SIMS, NIMS, ICS and become compliant so that they're eligible for FEMA funding. We try to make it our business to know where the risks are and make sure that those areas are being monitored when water levels come up. We also teach flood fight methods training classes to locals throughout the state, and we've trained hundreds of locals statewide this year. And then we participate in mutual aid regional advisory committees and mutual aid regional information exchange groups. Kind of just to close up, I wanted to emphasize the results that come from our preparedness efforts. Wanted to reiterate that the work we do leads to addressing some of the council's core strategies for reducing flood risks, and of course addressing the recommendations from the SB 27 Delta Multi-Hazard Coordination Task Force. So regardless if the emergency is from an earthquake event or a weather event, we're preparing to respond to all levels of emergency within the Delta. And through this work that we're doing, which I've talked about today, we're improving response time. We're increasing the locals' response capabilities and the local self-reliance, specifically with our grants, by paying for local plans and maps that give them the information to make more informed decisions, local training and exercise to broaden that experience and training, and also the material stockpiles and the state material pre-positioning to provide the tools needed to respond more quickly to emergencies. So really we feel that at the end of the day, the more capable the locals are, the more capable the state is at a whole to promptly respond to emergencies.
Thank you. Yes.
The funding, it's primarily still coming from 1E and 84, or was there additional funding that's getting out now from Prop 1, or can you speak to that?
Thank you. Yes. So our program so far, the Delta Emergency Program, has been funded by Prop 1. We did receive an additional $5 million, Prop 1E. We did receive an additional $5 million of Prop 1, so that's new. And that will be to actually fund, it was meant to fund a third round of Delta grants, but because of the deadline on using the money, we're actually going to be using that to fund the second round of Delta grants. And the third round will be funded by our remaining Prop 1E.
Casey, you mentioned levy conditions and accumulating that data. In what form, well, first of all, who's doing the inspections? In what form do the reports come? And how is that information managed? Is it public information, or is it held proprietarily by DWR?
I don't have all the answers to all the questions you asked, but I can say that we collect the information based on, for state plan and flood control levies, based on our own inspectors through DWR. And then when we go out and do our pre-season preparedness meetings, we basically use word of mouth. We ask the group, we poll the group, what are areas that you're concerned with, what keeps you up at night, and we get a lot of our information that way. We also collect the information from calls that come in to the Flood Operations Center during emergencies and non-emergency times. So that's kind of how we collect that information. As far as whether it's proprietary or not, I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Any other questions of Casey? If not, Lynn? Oh, one more.
You know, back on on the funding issue, I'm just wondering, after how many years of drought, 6+ years of drought, how do you maintain a budget, and how do you keep at the forefront in people's minds the need for this sort of preparedness? And also, you know, what are the fluctuations like in personnel at DWR and other places? I'm just curious.
Definitely, when you've had many years of drought, people tend to forget about floods. We continue to do our outreach, whether we're in a drought period or not. We continue to have pre-season flood preparedness meetings throughout the state every year, no matter the water conditions. And so we really try to kind of message that flood can happen during a drought. A flood can happen on a sunny day. It doesn't need to happen during a storm. And so just, I think, continuing to have that message be delivered regardless of the conditions is one way that we do that.
Lynn, welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here to talk about the Northern California Catastrophic Flood Response Plan. And I'm going to shorten that to flood plan because I don't want to say that every time we talk about this. Also, our plan is based on a severe flood incident that could inundate a great portion of the Sacramento River Basin and the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta region. As you know, flooding would affect local and state government agencies along with millions of residents, requiring widespread evacuations, and infrastructure restoration could take several months to years. And I'm sure that you noted that I did not say this is a Delta catastrophic flood response plan, because this plan has morphed over the years into something bigger than just the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. The slides? Okay. Well, no, they're not up there yet. So anyway, I guess while we're waiting for the slides, I will continue to talk. So why are we doing a catastrophic plan? A lot of us, the question has been asked, especially of us at Cal OES, and that's because the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Emergency Preparedness Act, whoops. And where's your clicker? There we go. We'll try that one right there. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So why are we doing a catastrophic flood plan? Well, you know this better than I do, that the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Emergency Preparedness Act of 2008, or SB 27, said that state OES would write a catastrophic plan for the Delta. You also know that it was an unfunded mandate. So it took several years before Cal OES and DWR got together and said, we feel this is really important enough that we're willing to put the manpower and the people behind it in order to write a plan. Back at the time, it started in 2012, but we did have a little bit of difficulty defining on what it is that we wanted to do for this plan. At that time, USGS came out with their arc storm scenario. FEMA's push was, well, if you're going to do a flood plan, then let's use arc storm as a scenario. Also, we've had lots of changes in personnel. We've had lots of changes in program managers. We've had lots of flood, fires, earthquake incidences between the time this plan started. We also had El Nino in the middle of all of our flood planning efforts, so we were well on our way to doing flood planning when El Nino came into the picture. So anyway, we are about to the point where we're ready to sign our plan. One of the other things, too, I just want to note is that since 2014, as Casey has mentioned, we have been meeting almost monthly with DWR to talk about flood coordination and response. We've also been doing training for the last several years with our State Operations Center staff because, as you mentioned before, we've gone years without any disasters, without any floods. We have a whole turnover of personnel. Most of our people didn't know what DWR was, what they did, how they worked, or how we coordinated. So we've been working for the last 2 years, meeting regularly in order to make sure that we all understand how it is that we are going to work together. We were also going to be doing training this year, more intensive training for our incident support teams. However, the wildfire response has kind of gotten in the way, so that's been delayed a little bit, but we will be doing it hopefully in the beginning of 2018. Again, our coordination efforts came in very handy in 2015 when we were doing El Nino planning, and we were talking about the flood fight materials a few minutes ago. Those stockpiles came in very handy too because we repositioned stockpiles throughout the state, not just for the Delta, for flood response. So that was also in Southern California. I'm not too sure much about Northern California, but we did distribute those throughout the state. And it certainly did bring DWR and OES closer together for the last couple of years. So here's just a couple of points about the flood plan of note, that this was a state-led planning effort with FEMA support. That is different than any of our other catastrophic plans, which have all been led by FEMA with support from the state. So all of the state agencies who had a part in this plan had to step up and take lead in that planning effort, and we appreciate their support. This was also a new plan, and it is the 4th catastrophic plan for California. The other plans are the Bay Area Earthquake Plan, Southern California Earthquake Plan, and Cascadia Earthquake and Tsunami Plan. Notice the common denominator there is the word earthquake. This is the first time we have done a catastrophic flood plan in California. As a matter of fact, while this plan was started, they were in the middle of updating the Bay Area Earthquake Plan, and right now we are updating the Southern California Earthquake Plan. This was also the first weather-based catastrophic plan, which presented a lot of unique challenges because, as you know, weather is a hard thing to predict. Everybody swore for El Nino in 2015 that the state was going to wash away, yet it was a very dry year. We didn't have any amount of rain that we were expecting. So it was also the first time we've had a progressive weather event versus a no-notice event, because earthquakes obviously are no-notice. When as soon as they happen in a catastrophic event, you assume that there's a state declaration, there's a federal declaration, and everybody comes to your aid. Not so with a flood event. They are slow rising. It takes time, days or weeks, or sometimes, a month before it gears up into some sort of a level that you can define as catastrophic. Part of that, too, was how do you define catastrophic flooding? Well, if your house floods, obviously it's catastrophic. But how do you do that on a state level? How do you define what actually is catastrophic flooding? Except for waiting to the very end, counting up the amount of money it is that you spend or responded, that sort of a deal. So it's been a little bit of difficult trying to define the parameters of the plan. Also, this was, like I said, a flood plan versus an earthquake plan. One of the good things for us is that we had a better definition of how to define the impact in our flood plan versus you're in a flood zone or you're out of a flood zone, and you'll see how that came into play here in a few minutes. Also, our plan was designed for our state federal operations, planning, training, and exercises. Our plan can also be used for any type of flood event, especially for the counties that are within our planning area. So it doesn't matter whether it's a small event or a large event. The way we have written the plan and designed it, it can be used for any kind of flood event, even a sunny day flood event like they had in Jones Tract a few years back. It is a living document that can be edited and updated as information becomes available. It also provides tools for what we call geographic operations. An OA is a county in the standardized emergency management system world that we use here for California. An operational area is actually a county. And then we also have branch profiles, and I'll talk about those here in a few more minutes. Some of the things that are good so far about our planning effort is that in January, February 2007 winter storms, it validated all of our planning assumptions, it validated our phases, and it validated a lot of our planning factors. It was also used as a base plan for the Oroville Dam response plan that we had incidents at the Oroville Dam. Luckily for our planning folks, is that the inundation area for the Oroville Dam failure mirrored the 100-500-year flood zones that we were using as part of our plan. So when the State Operations Center was activated and people responded, they already had a plan that they could at least look to for determining what is that could be at risk. And I say that because when public health personnel, California Department of Public Health personnel responded to the SOC, the first question they were asked is what hospitals, what skilled nursing facilities are in the impact area. First they got that panic looked on their face, and then somebody said, hey, go get the flood plan, and within 15 minutes they could tell us what hospitals, what skilled nursing facilities, what other medical facilities were at risk so that they could start evacuations. And then also our flood plan can be used as a model for other counties within our planning area if they want to use it or incorporate that into their flood response plans, mitigation plans, or whatever it is that they're doing at the county level. These are the 10 counties in our Northern California plan. I will tell you at the beginning, I told you that they were trying to base the plan on the USGS mythical, I don't know if they would call it mythical or not, ARC storm, the storm to end all storms. So there were like 21 counties, and then it went down. I don't know how many times the number of counties changed. By the time I came on to the planning effort, these are the 10 that we decided to focus on for this first iteration of the plan. And in the next update of the plan, we could also add more counties to it. But you see it goes all the way from Butte, Glenn County, all the way down to Contra Costa and San Joaquin counties. Most of the plan obviously is focused on the Sacramento River and the Delta region. We were suggesting in the next update of this plan that they look at the San Joaquin River and how that feeds into the Delta, because obviously all water in Central Valley and the Delta, in the Central Valley goes out through the Delta. We think that they need to be included in this plan, so that's our recommendation for any kind of updates. Here is kind of like our scenario, even though we're calling this a risk-based plan versus a scenario plan. We, again, with the ARC storm, when we came on to the planning project, nobody could explain to me what ARC storm meant. When I looked at a lot of the planning efforts, there were things like all levees hold, all levees fail. Well, we know that that's not true. We also did not want to arbitrarily pick levees and say, okay, well, let's pretend this levee fails and see what happens. Or we did not want to say where the water goes or where it doesn't go. Mother Nature has a way of doing its own thing. So we said, what is the one thing that people can agree on for the most part, because people don't agree on everything totally. But for the most part, we have the federal insurance rate maps, 100 and 500-year flood zones. We also know that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, after the 96, 97 floods, did a 100, 200, and 500-year flood study and came up with some flood zones. So we said, let's combine the two 100s and the two 500s and say, this is what a catastrophic flood for this region would look like. The water could be beyond those boundaries, but for the most part, here are the boundaries that could be affected. Then we were able to do a risk assessment and say, okay, what's within these boundaries and what's outside of these boundaries, so that people could get an idea of the number of schools, the number of police stations and law enforcement stations, the number of emergency operations center, the number of, again, I talked about hospital skilled nursing facilities, the number of fire departments that are within this area, so that at least that would give people an idea of what it is that they had to plan for. If you notice, Sacramento is in the 500-year flood zone, so what is that going to do to all of the state agencies who are not only having to respond to the incident, but are also having to do continuity of operations, continuity of government plans at the same time they're responding to the state.
Ken?
So, yes.
Just to connect back to the previous speakers, so you're planning around, so here's the catastrophic flood, here's the effects. You know, the strategy or the tactics to respond to that, are we stockpiling for the catastrophic event? Are we planning for the catastrophic event? What's the planning standard that DWR on the ground is kind of expecting? Or is this just overall, how do we respond to a catastrophic flood? We're not saying this is what we're preparing for. This is more about what we.
Right. Well, this is the first step, is to, do the risk assessment, look at the plan, and then say, okay, well, what is it that we can do to prepare for this? Obviously, like I said, this plan, we can do training, we can do exercises. It's not the end of the planning process. Obviously, we will continue to meet with DWR, and then we will start having those conversations. But if you want to look at the next slide, I think that might kind of help show you some of the challenges that we have when it comes to flooding here within California. And this is a map of the January, February 2017 counties and who declared responses during the rainy season. There are 52 out of the 58 counties that have declared emergencies for flooding this year, some of those multiple times. So there's no really such thing as a catastrophic flood to the Delta alone. It's flooding to California as a whole. And not just California, but also probably to other western states here in the West. In 1997-98, 57 out of 58 counties declared. So one of the difficulties that we have is how as a state do we plan for a catastrophic flood in the Delta knowing that the whole state is flooding at the same time, or the majority of the state is flooding at the same time. So it's a little bit different than some of our other earthquake plans because, it's Southern California, you assume that the rest of the state is not affected. When you do that in the Bay Area, it's the Bay Area, and you assume the rest of the state is not affected. Same thing for Cascadia. You can't do that in a flood plan. You have to assume that the whole state is impacted. And how do you prepare for that? So those are conversations that continue to happen and will go on probably for many years. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, just in closing up here, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea overall of how the plan is organized. So here's part one of our plan. We call it the operations plan. This is kind of our base plan that talks about what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, what are our different phases. FEMA likes to have their phases where it's, pre-incident, incident, post-incident kind of deal. So we talk about our different phases, which are different from earthquake because, again, this is a noticed event versus a no-noticed event for the most part. Then we talk about our task organization. Again, that's a state-federal piece of how we come together and how we work at the State Operations Center and who's responsible for what. Annex B is kind of an overall situation report. One of the things I forgot to mention earlier is that even though we talk about this being a flood plan, we also did look at earthquake risks, and we have those identified in the plan because they were really not addressed adequately in the Bay Area earthquake plan. So we've kind of addressed the threat of earthquakes in the Delta also. Then we talk about Annex C, which is flood operations. As I mentioned before, a lot of people at State OES didn't even know what DWR is or what they do. So this is kind of like their piece that talks about how they operate and how we interface with them. We have logistics, and we have our execution checklist, because everybody needs a checklist. So when you walk in the SOC at 12 o'clock at night and you don't know what to do, you pick up a checklist and you start going down the checklist. It was developed by each one of the state agencies that have a part in this plan, so they all have ownership in what it is that they do. And this is kind of like the Reader's Digest version, so if there is a quick event, you could pick this up and you can at least have an idea of the overall organization. Here's part 2 of our plan, and this is where the different areas that we looked at. Again, this is the first iteration of a plan. I'm sure there are probably many other areas that we could have spent time on, but these are the ones that we chose to begin with. So we looked at evacuation transportation. We've identified all of the airports, all of the railroads, all of the marine assets that are within these 10 counties. Remember, we're only focused on the 10 counties. We talk about mass search and rescue, public information, mass care and shelter, infrastructure, wastewater, energy. We did find out that 70% of the energy for the Bay Area comes from Contra Costa County. So if Contra Costa County is flooded, the Bay Area might have a few issues when it comes to power. We also looked at agriculture operations, because in the other earthquake plans, they're within cities, large urban areas. Agriculture isn't as big a deal as it is obviously in the Delta. We also looked at public health. Again, as I mentioned to you, we've identified all the hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, all of their different clinics and medical facilities as they have and what will be impacted by a flood. This is the part of the plan, part 3, that is different from any of our other catastrophic floods. And this is where we get down into those 10 county profiles. And basically what that is in this plan, it talks about their flood history. It has all their CDEC information. It has all their dam information, what dams could be affected. Again, all of that individual pieces of information that we collected from part 2 broken down into the plan. Again, remember, this is written for people who know nothing about the area, who walk into the State Operations Center and they're told, go to work and start planning. And you're like, well, what do we do? Well, here, if you're assigned to this county, here's everything you need to know about this county when it comes to flooding. That gives them a starting point and others to do their planning or to have their conversations or whatever it is they do. Or if you are a field DSC, like some of my peers, and I'm sent to that county, I can give them that piece of the plan and say, here, take this with you. This will give you an idea of the different areas that you need to look at or concentrate on. Again, as a starting place, all the information is going to have to be obviously verified and vetted at the time, but at least gives you an idea of what to do. Then the branch profiles, again, is the way we are organized. We can break this 10 counties into bite-sized pieces and say, okay, now if you're in charge of these 2 counties, here's all the information that you need to know. So we're really excited about the way it is that we package this piece of the plan, and we think it will be very beneficial when it comes to training and exercises in the future for flood response. So with that, that's kind of the brief down and dirty about the flood plan. Are there any questions?
Yeah, a quick one. Public education and public awareness is a big part of flood risk management. We've received over the years some real practical suggestions of things that could be implemented prior to an event, such as individuals who own boats and live in an area such as the Delta should not lash their boats to the trailers, but leave them unlashed with a leash long enough to allow that boat to float to high water mark. Another one was that blue lines should be painted at the high level mark on light poles in communities, just to remind people if there's a levee break, that's where the water's going to go. What do you think of things like that?
I think that's probably very good information to know if you live in those areas, but we leave that up to the individual counties or operational areas to determine how they want to promote their flood preparedness information. Obviously, there's 1 week a year that we have the Flood Preparedness Week, where DWR does a lot of promotional information. We also put a lot of information on our website, but you're right, it's all general, good to know information. Obviously, that information needs to be tailored to that community, which is where we expect the counties or the cities in order to do that kind of, in-depth information. and developing evacuation maps. At the state, we're not going to develop an evacuation map for particular areas. Again, that's done at the local level.
All right, all right. Good to know. John?
I was wondering about coordination for potential for hazardous material spills. Is there, because it seems like if there's a significant flooding, there's definitely potential for
Yes.
all kinds of.
Well, we always say flood water is a big toxic soup, so it doesn't really matter where you are. Working with Cal EPA, there's obviously every gas station, every restaurant, every business, every home becomes a hazmat. What we were talking about with them at the time of an incident is to really look for those facilities that have large amounts of chemicals, and then they become like a hot spot that we need to be aware of. But the old saying, the solution to pollution is dilution. So all of the water is a toxic hazard. We've learned that obviously from Hurricane Katrina and other places where first responders have gone out and gotten skin rashes and other nasty things. So yes, that is a big concern. But how do you address that when 10 counties are underwater?
Any other question? Ken?
I just wanted to point out that Mr. Mello gave me a tour out there. I went with Eric Vink from the Delta Protection Commission, and that was really valuable to me because I saw just, kind of the situation on the ground, but also how precarious it is and how you have to be on top, or the Reclamation District has to be on top of so many things, and you're right there and you've got to respond. And, I kind of, when you were going through the money situation, I remember talking to you about having to go to the bank and all that, and it just seems, you got this issue on how do you have a stable revenue source. The only stable revenue source is your assessments in the Reclamation District. And it seems like, I don't know if we've convinced ourselves that bond funding is a stable revenue source when it's not. And my question on the sort of catastrophic preparation is, that's going to be a money issue as well. And it seems like this is the common thread. Maybe I'd ask Skip, as a local government official within that area, what's your assessment on preparedness? How did we do this year? What lessons were learned? Are we pretty happy with where we are? Or?
Well, I can't speak specifically to flooding, but I can say the fires recently, the coordination among the OESs in the different areas, Napa, Sonoma, and Solano, worked very well. OES was in front of the board a couple weeks ago to talk about how the things that we had implemented over the last couple of years really did work. Unfortunately, it took a catastrophe of such magnitude that we saw, but we're planning, and we can always learn from our mistakes, obviously.
I mean, how does the panel feel? I mean, what did we learn this year in the scope of emergency preparedness? What you went over, Lynn, is just overwhelming, but, how do you, and Steve, what do you guys think? How did we do? What did we learn? What should be sort of the next step in improving response and preparedness?
So at the state level, I've learned that we don't have enough people to do everything it is that needs to be done. So I don't know how we solve that one, but there have been a lot of lessons learned. Again, we just keep planning and keep training and keep making sure that this is in people's minds all of the time while they're doing their day-to-day jobs. So.
I'd second what Lynn said also, as far as having a depth of trained individuals at the state to support our flood operations center. As I mentioned, we had a very extended activation this past year, and we normally have 2 rostered teams that man the flood operations center, and they work on 12-hour, 24-hour operational periods for 12-hour shifts. And what we've done is we've actually changed to a 3 rostered setup that's going to have over 250 people that are going to be trained to support those efforts, and it just really provides us with a deeper pool of knowledgeable individuals to draw on. We've also brought back 2 of our retired flood fighting specialists who each have over 30 years of experience working on the ground on flood emergencies on levees, and we have them actually providing training to our newer flood fight specialists, going over photographs and videos of incidents and having dialogue and discussion. What do we do about this issue? And really trying to pass along the knowledge that's been gained over the years.
And Dave Chima was out training some of your staff in our district this year, I do believe. Dave's a heck of a good guy. He's been around through all the flood wars that I've been around through, or nearly all of them. What I see is that, it's important to train up your new patrollers on the local level. This year, I think we only had 2 fellows that had been through the wars before. And some of the new folks were a little overzealous in telling you where there was a problem and marking it. And so then the next crew comes on and they see something that's marked that really not an issue. I mean, you need to get out there early before an event happens to see what's normal, because we districts are below sea level, most of us, at least a portion of our district is. And, there is seepage. If there's been a big rain the night before, there's going to be some water on top of the ground at the base of the levee. Doesn't mean it's coming from the river and it's a problem. So it's very important for your patrollers to be out there to see what's normal. I had a trustee with me, and I talked about the clear path through the delta, through the levee, and he was on that side. And we went down, and I was standing on the east side of the levee because that was the biggest threat. The other 2 sets of patrollers were doing the whole loop. I was staying on the east side. And we'd gone down about 3 miles, turned around, came back, and I said, whoa. I back up, and there's water running through the levee. It was a problem. And Dennis says, well, I thought that was always there. Well, he's a new trustee. He had never been through a flood fight before. He and his family had never pulled a patrol before. And he just didn't recognize it when there was a problem. And the key is early recognition and early response and having stuff pre-positioned. What I found is that you never have enough equipment. You never have enough material. And I don't give a darn how big of a reserve a district such as mine builds within our fiscal capabilities. And most of us don't. And I've been asked before, how big of a reserve do you have? I said, I'd rather be broken in debt and safer than have a big reserve and be in greater danger of flooding. And so we literally spend as much as we can within our fiscal constraints to make our, to protect life and property, which is our charge. And, what I've learned is that there are very real fiscal constraints. And one of the first calls, when we had the big slip, I called the engineer first, county OES second, the banker, the nearby resident right across the island, and third, and the Bank of Rio Vista fourth, because we had not accessed the original $750,000. I want to make sure they weren't going to pull it on us, because if you don't pay your vendors, they'll pull out. And furthermore, to let them know that we're going to have to borrow a heck of a lot of money. And, I realize they're a small bank. I don't know if it's within your means. Are we going to have to go to a bigger lending institution and explain how warrants work? Perhaps the Bank of Stockton might have been interested, but most banks are not aware of how the warrant system works. And regulators really frown on banks giving loans to people that aren't secured. And the only thing that secures our indebtedness to the Bank of Rio Vista is our ability to assess. Mm-hmm. And if the island is flooded, that ability to assess is minimal. So there is a certain amount of trepidation by our lenders that needs to be dealt with, especially when you have, 8 months later, you've not received the emergency grant. And you'd think an emergency grant would, it's an emergency, right? You're going to get the money? Ooh, that didn't happen. How long is it going to take for FEMA to figure out whether we're eligible or not. Is state OES going to step in? Subventions can only do so much, and in a year such as this, or such as last year, is the program going to be underfunded, oversubscribed, however you want to put it? So your lenders are key to we local maintaining agencies' responses to whatever emergencies befall us. And the Delta is key to transferring water south. Again, in lieu of an isolated facility, it goes through our channels. The McCormick-Williamson tract was slated to be turned into, opened up and turned into tidal habitat. The state water contractors were concerned that during certain conditions, it would degrade the amount of degrade the water that was being shipped south with bromides, chlorides, ocean stuff. McCormick-Williamson is relatively shallow and only 1,800 acres. Tyler Island is relatively deep and 8,500 acres. If an island such as Tyler flooded, what would the impacts be to the state water and federal water projects? So, and I've told you before that the subventions program came about to help offset our costs, not because, as I've heard one of your staff say, it's a grant, it's a subsidy. That really causes me great umbrage. It's not a subsidy. We're getting reimbursed for the public use of the Delta, recreational boating, and through Delta transfer of state and federal water damages our levees. And the state has commissioned and undertaken and completed studies that quantify the amount of that damage. And I don't think it's fair that, the burden is fully on our shoulders, especially in the short term. Long term, it may work out, but we don't know that.
Any other questions? Do we have any public requests for comment? Gilbert Cozio, MBK Engineers.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the council. Gilbert Cosio, MBK Engineers. We're reclamation district engineers representing about 40% of the Delta. Just wanted to, one, thank you for having this panel. I really get frustrated with plans and strategies and stuff. I'm a doer, and these are the people that are out there doing it. So I really appreciate the fact you get these people up here and kind of give you the straight poop of what they've been going through. I just want to make a couple of comments. I hadn't planned to talk, but a couple of things got me thinking. One, the grants that DWR and Casey's group has put out have been fantastic. I mean, they've been small grants, but the amount of work we've been able to do is really useful. One of the things Steve mentioned was the fact that he had to train some of his newer trustees. One of the things we're doing with the grants is we're putting together flood contingency maps that show problem areas historically and describe historic issues that have been on the islands. We've got a small report that kind of gives you all the information on what to look for, like the key water surface elevations that you get off the sea deck, that sort of thing. And so it not only helps with the local landowners who have new landowners and trustees coming on all the time, the turnover at the state, these floods only happen every 10, 15, 20 years. When we go back to the state, they don't really know anything either. So these plans are really invaluable. It's not just in the Delta, but up the Sacramento River. They've been huge. So we appreciate the fact that they've been getting those things out in a timely manner. Mr. Mello mentioned that his assessment is $55 an acre. That's on the higher end of assessments. Most of our districts, the upper end's about $50. We have one that's been $60 because they had some major problems they've been having to get through. But you talk about your investment strategy. That's the kind of stuff. Steve could probably give you some really good information on how much more you can come up with, if any.
And then, what's the point of it? You can't bankrupt your landowners. But you can't bankrupt your assessment payers. Then they're not going to be able to pay you anything.
Another farmer, but he probably has a different idea.
Well, I was going to say, that includes your irrigation costs. The assessment covers the electricity that's used to drain to provide the drainage, which is essentially your irrigation costs.
It's a portion of the irrigation cost, yeah. Yeah, it's not putting the water on, it's getting the water off. So it's a portion of the irrigation cost, not application.
The last point I wanted to make was that this is the first disaster, as long as I can remember, that the state hasn't had special legislation to come up with money to assist rec districts and other agencies that need to repair levees. Even in 06, the Schwarzenegger administration came up with AB 142, which came with $500 million of repair money that was funded the Corps of Engineers work and some other state work. Right now, the state is getting out and fixing some critical sites on state plan of flood control levees. I think we submitted about 500 sites of damage on state plan of flood control levees, and maybe 10% are getting fixed. And the money is coming from existing programs, and so deferred maintenance and some other flood response projects we've been planning to perform are not going to be done now because the state's robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we're going into this next flood season kind of in a deficit. We've got some damage out there, we're watching, and we're coming up with contingency plans, but potentially we could have some problems spring up pretty quick. And then most of our districts are strapped, just as 563 is, and so we really don't have money to react with a whole lot of work. So I just wanted to let you know that that's out there, and we're watching it. The state's helping us watch it, and we'll get to this flood season and see how things go.
Oh, thank you very much.
There was certainly nobody irrigating during the 2 months that we spent $50,000 pumping out rainwater.
Well, I understand that, Steve.
and,
It's a unique area in terms of agriculture.
And the what is pumped out is only a portion of what is applied. There is natural seepage and upwelling that we have to deal with.
Great. Well, we get that. Okay, very informative panel. Thank you all, Steve, Casey, Len, Aaron, thank you for facilitating this. And that concludes file item number 10.
Thank you all.
Thank you. The next panel will cover the California Water Plan update.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Good to see you, sir. Good to see you. Thanks for all your efforts and interest. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, Anthony, are you going to introduce this topic?
I will be introducing this topic, yes. Good afternoon, Council. Chair Ferrini, I'm pinch hitting for Dan Constable, who cannot be here. He's away on an emergency. But I'll be introducing the California Water Plant Update 2018 agenda item. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide an overview of the development process for the California Water Plant Update 2018, identify key content in the preliminary draft, and the next steps to finalize the plan. In October, this past October, Council staff provided comments on the preliminary draft on the Update 2018. The comments are supportive of the work that DWR has done thus far and provided early inquiries which can be contemplated as you hear this presentation. They are: how will the Delta be acknowledged as a key nexus to many of the update's identified issues? How will the Delta Plan and its pending refined performance measures be referenced and included into the Update 2018? And how will the environmental justice concerns be considered? Today we will hear information about new features in the California Water Plan Update 2018, the plan's comprehensive approach, and descriptions of the plan's chapters. We also hear about FloodMAR and the next phase of the system reoperation study. And today our panel is comprised of Mr. Kamiarkovich, Division Chief and Manager of the statewide Integrated Water Management Division for Department of Water Resources, Camior?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Fiorini, council members, staff. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you ongoing progress on the 2018 update of the water plan. I believe the last time I met with you, I was presenting the outcome of the 2013 water plan. And from the get-go, I'd like to say that we've been on a 17-year journey, and each of the water plans from the year 2000 have built on each other. And in this water plan update, we want to take a different approach rather than basically reproduce all of the content, the resource management strategies, the regional reports, the situation assessment. We thought and think that it will be more effective to use this update as a prioritization and a focusing of what we need to do, given that California is all about a tale of two extremes. Having lived through the most consequential 5-year drought followed by the wettest year of record, it just reminds us that even as a Mediterranean climate, given climate change and the way we've developed on the land, those extremes are becoming more pronounced. And this water plan update really needs to address how the state has to position itself in the near term and long term to address those extremes, those extreme events. The other thing we want to do is build on the alignment work that we've done with state agencies and other stakeholders. I'm really pleased with the level of engagement of Stewardship Council staff in updates of the water plan. And Cassandra Enos Nobriga is representing you on the steering committee. In fact, we meet again Monday afternoon to talk about the postscript from the plenary meeting and the comments that we've been receiving on the preliminary draft. The other thing we want this water plan to do is to memorialize and not lose the innovation of the governor's water action plan. As you know, there is no requirement that the next governor, next administration have an action plan or even continue it. And we thought that it would be the state would be well served to include a 5-year implementation and funding strategy in each subsequent update of the water plan to build on that innovation, which at its core has been encouraging and directing state agencies to work together to take a more integrated water management approach. So one of the things we've observed and would like to change is that our past practice or even current practice on doing water management is been focused on advocacies that are not necessarily aligned or consistent, and those advocacies are focused on actions and projects. And we believe that to be moving toward a more sustainable and integrated approach for water management, we need to do more work up front on getting shared intent amongst the various stakeholders and focus on the outcomes as much and more so than the actions. And the assessments that we do, much like the Delta Plan has framed, has to be more about, are the investments and actions we're taking moving us toward those outcomes, not did I get my project implemented and the funding for it. And really the reactive management that we have practiced over the last many years has not been devoid of investment. We've invested to Band-Aid fix our aging infrastructure. We've invested to react and respond to droughts and difficult conditions, and we have regulated to try to overcome legacy impacts and unintended consequences of our past decisions. Yet, in and of themselves, they have not and will not provide a sustainable water management system. And so we would like this 2018 water plan update to do a deeper dive on what we mean by sustainability when it comes to water management. And one of your handouts, or in your packet, is a 4-page brochure that's further detailed in the preliminary draft to lay out 4 societal values that really are akin to the triple bottom line, or the 3 E's of sustainability. And we describe them in terms of public health and safety, a healthy economy, a vital ecosystem, and what we call enriching experiences, recognizing that the public and many people use water for cultural practices, for recreation, and for its aesthetic values. And what we'd like in this water plan update is to get more consistent and common use of terminology and framework for being able to assess what outcomes do we really need to know that we're moving towards sustainability. Now, sustainability requires balance. And this doesn't mean that we need 25% in every project that we do for those 4 societal values. But what it does mean that as we move forward, as we assess what our investments are, what outcomes they're providing, we do need to show that all 4 societal values are being accomplished in a relative balance. And the water plan includes a set of guiding principles that are intended to help people when it comes to deciding how to balance among these societal values. When I want to make that next investment, what are the things that we should be considering? Also, sustainability requires a long view. One of the handouts that you have are the bulleted message points out of Chapter 1 of the preliminary draft, kind of laying out a vision of what we would like, where we would like the state to be moving toward. And we want to underscore that sustainability is a journey, not a destination. We cannot say if we only invest these next $10 billion, we will be sustainable. In fact, because of climate change and all the factors that are changing around us, sustainability is about a dynamic balance amongst those societal values. And to really help us advance in this next short term, we need to invest in what we're calling enabling conditions. It's not about doing a project. It's not even about the next water bond. It is about investing in these things. We're calling these the priorities of Update 2018. We need, as a state, to have better alignment of our very decentralized and in some ways fragmented water governance structure framework. And that state government is not immune by that. We have 30 members of the State Agency Steering Committee just for the state government, and that in and of itself is a commentary of how many people or entities need to be engaged to do integrated water management. Also, because of the siloed nature of the way we have done governance, the planning that we have, that we've done, and the regulations that we've established were done in these silos. They were not done with integrated water management as an intended outcome. And so we've got to do a better job of aligning the planning and regulatory framework among state government, federal government, and local entities. Capacity building. I know that the Delta Plan thinks very highly of good data and information. That's part of capacity building. Part of it is the facilitation and engagement of all of the entities. Many of our communities throughout California do not have the ability or the resources to do the level of engagement necessary to have effective integrated water management at a regional watershed/water basin scale. And the infrastructure that we have, both green and gray, natural and constructed in the state, needs rehabilitation, but more importantly, needs to be modernized to prepare us for the tale of two extremes. And to do that, we are going to have to do a better job of providing sufficient and stable funding at all levels to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Now, this graphic shows that traditionally our water management has occurred in those outer circles, again, in our specialized sectors. And to really get the kind of resilience that we're going to need out of our water management system and to hit all of those four societal values, we've got to drive toward the center circle. We have to do multi-benefit, multi-sector, interdisciplinary water management. And to make that happen, we've got to decide what actions and investments the state and locals need to make to get that to happen. Sustainability also requires time. We are under no illusion that Update 2018 is going to crack this nut and fix things forever. In fact, we see this update as a cornerstone that will be improved and evolved over the next probably 3 to 4 cycles of the water plan update. And for each of those cycles, we have to follow a much more deliberate management cycle that's, again, I think implicit and embedded in the Delta Plan. And that is set the intended outcomes, identify the actions that can get us there, do the monitoring assessments of whether those actions provided us those outcomes, and then give ourselves permission to fail and adapt and improve with each successive cycle. So I know in your packet you have a list of the 5 chapters of this update of the water plan, and council staff has already sent us a comment letter that we are considering incorporating into what will become the public review draft this coming February. Again, the Chapter 1 is really intended to tell this narrative of the tale of two extremes and what we need to do as a state to move toward a more sustainable water management system. And I'll talk about the sustainability outlook because I know that measuring metrics and tracking performance is one of your high priorities. In 2013 update, we worked with the council and many other entities throughout California to develop what we called a sustainability indicator framework. However, it was not organized around the 4 societal values, and it became a good first step, but a laundry list of lots of indicators, but not really clear how they can be used as a basket of indicators to really help us make decisions going forward. So this water plan update in Chapter 2 of the preliminary draft and the subsequent drafts, we're spending a lot of time laying out what kind of indicators, metrics, and process reporting do we need to give our decision and policymakers the information they need to moving forward. Tracking and reporting is a part of that. The second bullet is the harder nut to crack, and that is getting shared understanding and consistency across state government and California's diverse regions. So the other big driver in this water plan update, aside from the tale of two extremes and working towards sustainability, is not losing sight of the fact that our state, our 10 hydrologic regions, are the size of other states, and that we cannot come up with one cookie-cutter approach that works effectively everywhere. We can have consistent frameworks, we can have consistent indicators, yet when they are implemented on the ground, the actions that are taken to get people to those same intended outcomes will look very different. And as a state government, we have to recognize this and set policies that advance it. So when we go to the doctor, they check a few vital statistics, temperature, blood pressure, respiratory rate, heart rate, and based on that, they can get a fairly good sense of, are we healthy, or is there perhaps something that's not working? The trick for the sustainability outlook is coming up with that manageable set of indicators that can give people that first line of indication. Are things moving in the right direction, or is something not clicking that needs further attention? And as you well know, many of these metrics and indicator systems devolve into huge laundry lists of complicated and complex metrics that are hard to monitor, much less comprehend. So what we're working toward is different indicators for different spatial scales and temporal scales. And the basic indicators are really what we're trying to lay out, maybe a dozen, no more than 12, 10 to 12, that can really give us a sense of how the state and any one of our hydrologic regions are doing. Yet, to really be applicable and helpful on the ground, we're going to need a set of indicators that tier off of that inherently will be more detailed at the watershed scale and more advanced indicators. One of the questions that staff is in your packet for here is, how will the delta metrics be included in the water plan? And I really think in this graphic, the delta is somewhere between watershed and advanced indicators, the set of indicators that you and your staff have developed. The water plan wants to begin laying a common framework to move this forward. The staff in their comment letter has suggested maybe we should do a pilot project for the Delta region. We are all for doing more pilots. We have, and I'll talk about it, we've started one in the Russian River. We're also now partnering with the Santa Ana SAPA, the watershed folks, to do that. And we think that the best way to demonstrate the efficacy of a indicator framework is to apply it. And so we are, front and center, open to work with your staff to do a Delta region pilot of the sustainability outlook as we're developing in the water plan. So just as an example of what a basic indicator would look like, so for the societal value of public health and safety, one of the outcomes, one of those 12 outcomes at the state level that we've come up with is a reliable water supply for domestic needs, sanitation, and fire suppression. I think that's one of your two co-equal goals. And one of the things I'd like to lay out is none of the four societal goals are just about water supply. Water supply are outcomes within multiple societal values. So you'll see reliable water supply show up under more than one societal value. So it's there implicit. In this case, an indicator would be the water supply vulnerability to wildland fires. I'm just showing you this a little more complicated table to say that what I just showed you are 2 of the 12. And so for each of the 4 societal values, we have about 2 or 3 outcomes. And that's how we've gotten to this dozen. This is the vital ecosystems. Many of the indicators that are listed there are very close to what we've seen in the Delta Plan indicator set. And so trying to apply this to the Delta region, I don't think would be that difficult. I mentioned that we're doing the watershed scale pilots. We feel this is the only way to ground truth and demonstrate that this is more than an academic exercise. And so in the 2018 water plan update, the Russian River pilot, the Santa Ana pilot, maybe the Delta region pilot, are ways that we want to demonstrate and get energize people from other watersheds to begin applying this indicator framework. These are just some of the questions during the last plenary meeting that when we discussed the sustainability outlook. And Tom Filler, who's here at the meeting, he's leading this Chapter 2 work and has already met once with your staff, is now reviewing the comments from your staff, and will be following up on how to better incorporate and make consistent your work with the water plan work. So in Chapter 3, this is where the recommendations are. And again, some of the recommendations, and many of them are about these these enabling conditions, the funding, the legislative authority, and the governance. Some of the recommendations are about making change in the way things are implemented, changing behavior like a grant program or a regulation. These are ways that change the way people behave, either through incentives or oversight. There are then the type of indicators and outcomes that are system-wide. Are groundwater levels improving in some places? Are ecosystem functions coming back in the various ecoregions? And then ultimately tying those all back to the 4 societal goals through measurement and assessment. So chapters 4 and 5 are still in the works. Monday morning, we have a funding workshop for stakeholders and agency staff to talk about funding scenarios. The way we're approaching this is Chapter 3 actions can be costed out and say this is the level of investment that we would need to implement these priority recommendations. So how do we pay for them? Rather than come up with one approach, we are testing a few funding portfolios, and we want to show what the trade-offs are. One portfolio might lean more heavily toward bond funding, another toward sustained general funds. Another might look at some novel funding mechanisms through regional local assessments. And we don't think the Department of Water Resources or even the water plan should make that decision, but we need to put the information out to the legislature, to the governor, and the future administrations so that they can decide if we are committed to doing these actions, and this is what it'll cost over the next 5 to 10 years, what would be the portfolio of revenue that would work for the state. So where have we been? We've did last October, October of 2016, we launched our communication and engagement for this update. We've had lots of meetings in 2017. The last big one was our second annual plenary meeting here in Sacramento in September. As I mentioned, we've got a funding workshop Monday morning. We have the State Agency Steering Committee meeting again in the afternoon. And then by January, we need to put an administrative draft out so that we can get a public review draft on the street in February of 2018. Now, this water plan update, unlike the last 2 or 3 where we let the deadline slip, the deadline can't slip. It's got to be out by the end of December of 2018 under this administration. When the recall happened in 2003, it added 2 years to the release of the water plan because the new administration came in and they needed time to get their arms and minds around the water plan. This one, we have a hard stop at the end of 2018. Anthony mentioned that I wanted to talk about, one of your handouts is called Flood MAR, MAR for Managed Aquifer Recharge. And as an outcome of the 3rd phase of the system reoperation study, we assessed that one of the best uses of the remaining funds is to really explore how the state of California, and I mean state with a little s, everybody, can scale up the better alignment and integration of how we manage floodwaters with groundwater and for ecosystem benefits. This is an inherently integrated approach. The levees that were built have kept them apart. In a post-Sigma world, in a world where climate is driving us to more of these extreme events, this is an imperative strategy. And last week, the Department of Food and Ag, State Board of Food and Ag, held a managed aquifer recharge public forum. During that forum, this strategy was discussed. On the bottom of the back page of this is a link. We now have a discussion draft white paper developed by DWR with input from others to promote discussion about what are the benefits, what's the potential, what are the barriers and obstacles to getting this done more, particularly on agricultural and working lands in the Central Valley and the Central Coast. We will work to finalize this white paper by the end of this calendar year, and as a companion, we are beginning work on what we're calling a research and development plan of study. We recognize to do floodmar, which I akin to a moonshot for California. It sounds conceptually easy, but it's going to require some fundamental reworking of the way we manage and govern water, especially between flood and groundwater. And there's information that we're going to need to develop to get farmers, flood managers, and groundwater GSAs in the comfort zone that this is something that can help them. This plan of study would lay out a strategic roadmap for what studies and pilots will be needed to inform this new strategy. We would love to have the council and its staff review and comment on this draft white paper and to partner with us as we finalize this white paper and work on the plan of study. My vision is that joint developed plan of study will be more easily resourced when all of the partners can go forward and get the funding needed to do the studies. And I've already mentioned here, what's unique is this is a multi-sector engagement. The white paper includes lots of information of past work, the barriers and benefits, and the information gaps, and the plan of study that I mentioned. Implementation is going to require funding and commitment by the state. So with that, I'd be happy to take any additional questions or comments.
Patrick?
Thanks for the information and your enthusiasm. It's good.
It's hard to hide it.
In slide 2, one of your bullet points was recommend steps to strengthen agency and regulatory alignment. What chapter will that be in?
That's in chapter 3. So the slide the slide that I showed, the 2018 priorities that had governance and planning, those are the categories by which we have organized the recommendations in chapter 3. And so we would welcome comments on those specific recommendations that would help advance these 5 priorities.
Was it in here? I just missed it, a specific reference to governance or?
Yeah, so if you look at slide 8, it says update 2018 priorities, sustainability tied to societal values. It's the one after enabling conditions. One more. There you go.
Oh, I see where it says alignment of governance.
Yes, and so those are the categories or priorities that the actions, the recommendations are organized in chapter 3.
Oh, I see.
So we have specific actions under each one of those topics.
So the council was created partially as a result of analysis that there are so many governmental entities with some authority over water policy and the Delta itself. And so we were created as yet another to provide some oversight. what are you going to say about how the various agencies could work better together, since they all have some statutory authority or or some reason for being, such as the reclamation districts that we just heard from, and
Sure.
Specific function?
At the state scale, certainly the state agency steering committee that the water plan has convened since 2007 is a venue that we would like to use to continue that. As a outcome of getting the agencies together, we've now compiled about 40 what we call companion plans. The Delta Plan is one of those 40 companion plans. That's how many plans that, Central Valley Flood Plan is another one of those. The State Wildlife Action Plan is another one. We have lots of plans that are done by multiple agencies. The trick is, how can we use the water plan to weave these together in a meaningful way? And so, to turn it around, through your representation on the State Agency Steering Committee, we are soliciting recommendations for how DPIC or the Stewardship Council could help advance the alignment that we're needing, at least at the state level.
Perhaps, too, for ongoing issues where there's, multiple responsibilities like Delta levies, that an MOU with the council and flood board and DWR would be good to sign, don't you think?
I think agreements, and I don't know if the MOU is the best vehicle. I'm not in the middle of that. However, I think coordination and alignment of state plans is essential. And whatever vehicle or tool can help make that happen, then that's what we need to do. However, with reclamation districts and more local regional entities, we're advocating that regional watershed-based collaboratives like Integrated Regional Water Management, like the groundwater sustainability agencies, have to be the drivers of getting the entities together at the regional watershed / groundwater basin scale. What the state government can do is, how can we provide technical assistance? How can we help build capacity? How can we provide data? And in some cases, cost share where it's not cost effective to do something that the state wants done at a regional scale through our bond measures and other grant programs. So one of the things that I hope the 2018 Cornerstone will provide is a much better articulation and agreement of the effective role of state government. And I think what the trap we fall into every time we talk about we need more funding for state government is we haven't cracked that nut yet. We do not have agreement in California amongst its citizenry or the stakeholders we deal with for water management of what is the most effective value-added role of state government. If we can agree on that, we can cost it out, and we can have a very constructive discussion of where the funding could come from to provide the funding to state government to give that value-added benefit. The problem is people don't agree yet what is the role of state government. In fact, some believe that any kind of a fee assessment by the state is just a way of taking local money to the state, skimming something off that they're not going to get anything for, and then giving them some of it back. That perception has to change, and it's got to change through a very deliberate articulation of what is the role of state government. I believe there is things that we can do more cost effectively than every region doing them themselves. Could you imagine every region having to do climate analysis, downscaling of climate data, providing data across the state? I think those are the kinds of things that we've got to articulate on what the state's role should be.
Susan?
Thank you, Kamyar, for your many years of energy and enthusiasm for the water plan update. It's evolved into an amazing document. it's much different than it was in the 90s. I have a question, since we're talking about indicators. In your mind, what would the indicators of three things: state agency alignment, and the shared understanding, and then the consistency across state government and California's diverse regions?
Well, I think to the extent that we can develop integrated plans. So a good example is Safeguarding California. You know, that is a climate adaptation plan that was developed with input from multiple state agencies. The Governor's Water Action Plan is another example. It's unique. No other administration has put together that comprehensive of a water plan and then held people, you know, our feet to the fire to actually budget and organize our work around those priorities. So those are the planning indicators. If we have 40 companion plans that were developed somewhat in isolation, that is not an indication of alignment. So to the extent that state government can continue to develop integrated plans, and I think the water plan can play that role, provided everyone takes ownership and provides input. And then the funding. You know, we go to Department of Finance separately for the things we need to do. Wouldn't it be nice if we went together and said, here are the outcomes, here's the integrated plans, and the funding would be split amongst these state agencies in this way to provide these outcomes. Right now, when we go, sometimes what we hear, well, I think some other department is asking for that same thing. Aren't you duplicating efforts? And so I think that could be another indicator of state coordination.
Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kamyar, I have to echo Susan's comment about enthusiasm, and enthusiasm isn't usually what you associate with the state water plan, especially when you're tracking, you know, farm gate water and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I really have to commend for you and your staff for the creativity here. And I've heard there's a lot of buzz out there. You know, I guess I come at it from a different perspective. I spent my career at the local and regional level in Southern California. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we sort of think, at least in my part of the state, that we're the ones driving water sustainability. And so, you know, there is an integration, and I'm like a true believer in IRWM. I went through from, hey, let's form one to figure it out, to I think we created in San Diego County a pretty successful IRWM, and just, you know, really kind of think that's the wave of the future. It is, or it's here now. So I'm very personally very supportive of that. You know, one of the things I wanted to kind of impress and maybe kind of offer this up for staff is that, you know, what we're doing here in trying to achieve the co-equal goals, to us, it's a very clear mandate from the legislature. The Governor's Water Action Plan is supportive of that. We're out for public review on our conveyance, storage, and operations, which is more than just Delta-centric or even, you know, what can the state of California do? It's relying on all those regions and local agencies to, you know, whether it's to conserve or to do local supplies. I think the water plan evolved over the last few updates to be more, you know, to have more input from what's going on in the subregions. I would like to see us kind of have some overarching theme, you know, not just sustainability, but sustainability is part of achieving the co-equal goals, whether, you know, it's the healthy ecosystem and water reliability, whatever that is. I think I have a more expansive definition of water reliability than just sanitation and domestic uses. But, I mean, that's the issue. And it seems like in this update, you know, maybe that could be, I mean, it doesn't affect every part of the state, but it affects more of the state than anything else. And if there's an overarching theme, you know, how does the water plan fit into this? And, you know, your discussion about funding, I mean, we just keep coming back to funding, but really, I would say, course of my career over the last 30 years, you know, outside of the bond issues, which do not, you know, they go around, they really help, but that's not where the money's coming from. Money's coming at the local and regional level. So I mean, that's where we have to integrate. And I've got a different view now, seeing things at the state level on sort of the assessments and lack of funding, but you definitely have an uphill climb in that. And but that, you know, maybe that's what I'm asking for our input to be taking a bigger picture look at this and saying, hey, can we talk about where the co-equal goals fit into the water plan and how a lot of the actual, you know, the investments and your proactive actions are really trying to achieve that. And I think in a very visible way, because I mean, this is something we're mandated by the state legislature to do this. We're all sort of pulling together. You've got all these agencies. Can we get some focus on that and how these actions, yeah, it's sustainability, but we need this for, you know, to accomplish the co-equal goals. And so that, I'll let you respond. I'm going on. I have a couple other questions.
I agree with what you would like to see the water plan do. And I think with closer examination and certainly working with council staff, the current societal values, outcomes, and related indicators do implicitly include, and in some ways explicitly, the co-equal goals of the Delta. Yet, what we're trying to do is create a framework at the highest level that can provide consistency in multiple regions, multiple watersheds, and including the Delta. And so that's where I think a pilot in the Delta region will help hone the things you're wanting to see, is how could this framework actually help drive the achievement of the
I'm really at a higher level than that. I'm at, you know, if you look at our CSO amendment, I mean, we're talking about a water supply that serves 29 out of, what have we got, 36 million Californians. And we're relying on people in those other watersheds, not in the Delta. The Delta's not going to reduce reliance on the Delta. It's going to be all of the other water users in all of these other watersheds. They have to do things that are incorporated into the strategies in the water plan. And so I'm just saying that that is common. It doesn't get everybody, but 29 million out of that's pretty widespread. I mean, and I think I am asking, Mr. Chair, that there be explicit addressing in the state water plans, as that's the state's major water planning policy document about achieving the co-equal goals and reducing reliance on the Delta through sustainable water practices, and that if we don't achieve that, you know, that's where we should be focused. If we don't achieve it, we're not going to achieve water reliability, and we're not going to achieve ecosystem restoration. And, you know, the stakes are too high. It is the policy of the state of California. That's why I think that it is appropriate to use the state this update, especially of the state water plan, as a vehicle to at least capture all this under a larger policy umbrella. I'm trying to separate out, gee, what specifically happens in the Delta is just, it's important as what happens outside the Delta in the context of the water plan. So that's, and maybe giving staff some direction from the council that, you know, our input should be about raising the visibility of the co-equal goals and how that integrates not just as a supporting document, but as an overarching theme with the water plan. And I don't think it's inconsistent with the other, items that you have, but it does put it under this bigger umbrella, and it's a focused objective of the state. And so I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's much bigger than just specifically, doing a pilot in the Delta, which is important, but.
Well, we look forward to whatever input that staff, council, and staff would provide us.
Okay. I'm going to take that as I have a scent that I'm not gone rogue from the rest of the council.
Well, I saw everybody's head going this way, no one going that way.
Okay.
All right?
Just talking about, it's interesting because I've kind of, being a longtime water resource planner, I wondered about the relationship of, you talked about, Kamiar, Sigma, flood flows, the flood MAR, how do we use that in terms of complying with Sigma to recharge those groundwater basins? How do we use it to enhance the environment? And, we're all sort of looking at flood flows to do everything because it's also, behind conveyance, it's, little sip, big gulp. So we're trying to fill reservoirs, in other parts of the state during the same period. And it just, I've asked the question, is the only way to Sigma through fouling of agricultural land? And we don't know, but how's DWR seeing all of this balance out? How do you make, just those years where you have these high flows, how does it serve all these purposes?
Well, if I implicated that or implied that FloodMAR was going to solve everything, I did not mean that. FloodMAR is a tool in the toolbox. I think it's a very effective tool. In fact, it's bringing together at least 3 of the resource management strategies from the water plan toolbox: flood management, groundwater management, and ecosystem management. Someone calling?
Yeah. Somebody has a public comment.
Okay. Every GSA, Groundwater Sustainability Agency, working with its entities, has to do a water budget of their aquifer. And that will tell them where and how they are out of balance. And they will have to do a portfolio of actions: demand reduction, supply augmentation, and potentially land use change. I suspect land use change will be later in their discussions. They will do as much conservation as they can do. They will look for recycled water, storm water, desal water, flood waters to help bring their aquifer into balance. And ultimately, they may have to look to land use changes to get them the rest of the way. One of the neat things about FloodMAR is for engaging the working landscapes, the landowners, we are going to have to come up with a compensation system for the public benefits that FloodMAR would provide. The flood risk reduction, the remediation of degraded aquifers, getting the state to think of aquifers as natural infrastructure. They are the holding vessel of groundwater, and we need to treat them as an environmental resource as much as a water management resource. And to the extent that FloodMAR can provide ecosystem restoration, those are public benefits. When we monetize and compensate what those public benefits are, I am confident the farmers and the landowners will figure out how to change their own land use to make it work for them. They will have no problem, I think, to say, okay, I'm going to do this much of my land in annual crops because when that next flood peak comes, I'll be less, distressed of doing later planting. They may even set some land aside as a detention basin or a recharge basin if they can be compensated for the public benefits that it will provide. So implicitly, that would be a land use change, but it's not under duress, it's through incentives.
Kamiar, we sure appreciate you coming. One of the great skills you have is managing a large, diverse group of people to focus on a product and deliver. And we thank you for that, and I'm glad that our staff is working with you, and we may be providing some more comments and suggestions. And if the Delta pilot comes to fruition, all the better. So.
We look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any requests for public comment on file item number 11? That concludes that. Anthony, thank you. File item number 12, public comment. I have public comment. It's not often that you get to honor somebody who's retiring after 4 decades of service in our midst. Pat Rogers began her career at the Department of Forestry and soon after transferred to DWR, where she worked in the Division of Land and Right-of-Way. A slight detour from resources was when Governor Deukmejian's Blue Ribbon Task Force on the Commission for Educational Quality drew Pat into that realm, but she returned soon after to DWR, where she served in the personnel office. In 1999, CalFed was formed, and I think Pat understood the great work that was to be done ultimately here at the Stewardship Council, but her career in water and ecosystem work began at CalFed as the executive in an executive secretary position. In 2000, she was promoted to the executive assistant who supported directors Lester Stowe, Steve Ritchie, Patrick Wright, and Joe Grindstaff. In 2007, when the Delta Blue Ribbon Task Force was created, Pat went on to support John Curlin and Phil Eisenberg through that 2-year stint. The Delta Stewardship Council was then created in 2010. Pat was here and helped clerk our first meeting and every meeting since. I think at last count, we've had about 140 days of meetings here at the Delta Stewardship Council, and Patrick and I can attest to that because we've attended most of them. The preparation, the setup, the takedown, the support that you have provided has been invaluable. And we so appreciate your service. We're happy for you that you're now retiring and getting to exercise some of the grandmotherly duties that this work has impacted a little bit. But we're going to miss you. We're really going to miss you. And in particular, I'm going to miss you, wandering the halls and looking for Pat to find out what are we going to do at this meeting, what are we going to do at that meeting. Pat, I want to adjourn this meeting in the honor of your great service. The meeting is adjourned. And are some goodies to help celebrate your 4 decades of service. 3 decades.